Right. Welcome, everyone. I, Councilmember Dee Michelle, call the February 15th Council Study Session to order. Due to the Governor's Proclamation 20-28 relating to the COVID-19 Emergency and Open Public Meetings Act, this meeting will be held entirely remotely. There are multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. There is a general public comment opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, or you can make comments after the presentation and council question and answer period on tonight's agenda items for each item. Council President Walsh will also share a summary of any comments that have been emailed regarding tonight's agenda items. I will now take the roll call of the council members in attendance. Please say here when I call your name. Deputy Council President Hall.
Here.
Councilmember Hunt.
Here.
Councilmember Joe.
Here.
Councilmember Martz.
Here.
Councilmember Ray.
Here.
And Council President Walsh.
Here.
Thank you, everyone. The first item on the agenda is public comment. If there is anyone on the call now who would like to make public comments but did not sign up to speak, please raise your virtual hand. If you are on the phone, press #3. If you have joined by computer or smartphone, look for a hand icon. This varies by device. One option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right-hand corner. I will wait for a moment to see if anyone wishes to raise their hand. Clerk, has anyone signed up to speak or indicated a desire to speak this evening?
Councilmember DeMichelle, nobody has signed up previously, and I see no virtual hands raised at the moment.
All right, we will ask again as we go through the agenda tonight. Thank you very much. The first item on our agenda, excuse me for a minute while I pull up my screen. The first item on the agenda tonight is the Draft Human Services Strategic Plan, and that is presented by Monica Negrilla, Human Services Manager. And I just realized that I needed to ask Council President Walsh if we had any emails, comments on tonight's agenda.
Fantastic. Thank you, Councilmember DeMichelle. We did have 4 email comments that were sent in, 3 on the Draft Human Services Strategic Plan and 1 on public engagement. For the Human Services Strategic Plan, 1 commenter had concerns about the plans without considering associated cost, and we're also unconvinced that the plan gets us to the desired outcomes. 1 commenter felt that this plan is a departure from our traditional grant funding process and the comprehensive plan elements. And 1 noted support for the plan adoption with specific comments around training future mental health counselors and strong support for a day center. On the public engagement element of tonight's agenda, we had 1 comment noting the perception that current community input seems to go into a black box and that discourages future involvement. And that's the comments that we received. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And now I will turn it over for the first agenda item to our Human Services Manager, Monica Negrilla. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you so much, Councilmember DeMichelle. Good evening, council members. This is Monica Negrilla, Human Services Manager here at the city. Here with me tonight also is Hannah Roberts, our Human Services Coordinator, who is going to join me in the presentation in just a couple of moments. But before that, I would like to provide a brief introduction. So tonight we are returning to City Council, to you, to seek feedback on the updated Draft Human Services Strategic Plan. Specifically, the questions that we would like to pose to you tonight are: 1, does this version of the Draft Human Services Strategic Plan reflect the feedback that we received from you and from the community? And 2, are there additional changes recommended prior to us returning to City Council for a possible adoption? And so with that, I would like to invite next Hannah to provide a brief background and a recap of the strategic plan development we conducted so far. And then following Hannah's overview, I'll return to provide a summary of the changes and edits that we had made to the plan since last time we presented this item to City Council. So with that, Hannah, welcome.
Thank you so much, Monica. Good evening, council members. My name is Hannah Roberts. I'm the Human Services Coordinator. It is a pleasure to join you this evening to present to you on regards to the Human Services Strategic Plan. I will be presenting on the background, the plan development, and the strategic plan content. So looking at where we started, in 2017, we had a community needs assessment that then transitioned into 2019, a healthy community strategy. That was placed on pause and it restarted in 2021. Its scope was streamlined into the Human Services Strategic Plan. Community engagement was the priority and focus and forefront of the work that was current in the community needs. This then developed our needs and our priority areas. The draft plan was then formed and presented at the January Council study session. The process in developing the Human Services Strategic Plan began with the research of similar work conducted and looking internally at the City of Issaquah's work. Next, we did a comprehensive community engagement with intentional outreach to diverse communities. The voice of the community was really what led the community needs, which then determined our focus areas and our goal development. Throughout the entire process, we held an equity lens to help identify disproportionate representation of certain populations living in poverty in Issaquah and keeping historically the underrepresented population in mind. If you'd like a more detailed list, you can find that information in the staff report or detailed in the plan. So here is the strategic plan content areas. So first off, we start off with who we are. So who's Issaquah? What's the demographics? And what's human services? What is our role? What are our functions? We then move into what is the purpose. So we streamline the background, the plan development, what are our guiding principles, and how was community engagement conducted. In the middle of the plan, you'll find what did we learn throughout the community engagement. So what are our current partners and existing services within Issaquah, and what are the gaps? What do we not have here in Issaquah that are the community needs? This next section is what I like to call the meat and potatoes of our plan. This is where we are going, and it really just funnels and streamlines everything that we heard within our community engagement. And it really focuses in on what are the focus areas? What did we hear? What are our goals within those focus areas? What is the strategic approach? And what are the measurable actions to be able to meet some of those goals? We also focus on the funding process, the partnerships, and our connections. The cherry on top to end the strategic plan is what we look at, what's next, what are we measuring success and how do we measure success, and what are the next steps. This concludes my portion of the presentation, and I'm going to invite Monica back to continue our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Great update. This is Monica Negrilla again. Council members, I'm just so grateful to be working with Hannah. She was instrumental in this work, but also the other newly, as you might have met them, Human Services staff, Amir Shabana and Marisol Visser. Just very grateful for their work. So on to updates that we made to the plan since the January 11 Council study session. For this part of the presentation, I would like to provide a brief overview of the community engagement that we conducted this last month. Then I would like to summarize the feedback that we received from you, City Council, and also from the Human Services Commission, as well as other community stakeholders. Then I would like to dive a little bit into the content edits that we made, including some information on the requested budget items. And then finally, hopefully at the end, before we take your questions and comments, would love to talk a little bit about the proposed next steps. So regarding the community engagement we conducted this last month, we sought input from the Human Services Commission at their January 19 meeting. Then we also held a community workshop on January 25th, where we invited the community at large, but also our nonprofit partners. We also promoted the draft plan in the city's weekly newsletter for 3 weeks in a row. And really, we invited the community to contact us, to email us, to schedule meetings with us. We actually had some really meaningful conversations with community members through this process. We also conducted outreach to our nonprofit partners and to others who participated early on in this plan development. Last but not least, we conducted outreach to community and cultural groups who are not currently funded through city programs. Again, then returned with a final draft to the Human Services Commission at this last meeting that they held on February 9th. Next slide, please, Hannah. So a brief summary of the City Council's feedback from the January 11th study session. Some of the recommendations included a suggestion to highlight some specific populations, especially those who have low income or residents who are working. The working poor was a note that we received, but also highlight more seniors. We also received recommendations from you to incorporate the human services specific citywide performance measures into the plan, to highlight some basic needs a little bit more, and especially the Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank. We also received input from you to review the content and ensure that actions are measurable, to obtain feedback from non-funded agencies, and to address some budget and human services grants related programs. I'm going to talk, we definitely try to incorporate all of your feedback, and I'm going to talk in just a few minutes in a little bit more detail about a couple of these. But before I do that, I would like to move on to include some of the feedback that we received from the Human Services Commission and other community members. So for this a more detailed description of the specific feedback that we received and how we incorporated it in the plan is included in the staff report. You have a pretty detailed table there. This is just a brief summary and high-level overview. Again, from the community and the Human Services Commission, we received suggestions to make some additional edits, some content review, to provide some more information on some numbers and descriptions, and of course, some grammatical typos and revisions and errors there. We received input to provide some more information on poverty, some demographics on age-related information, and information on languages, information to just edit from some of our nonprofit agencies. They made suggestions to edit a bit some of their descriptions. Some community members noted that we should highlight a little bit more childcare service needs, seniors, and technology needs. We had some great conversations with some community members who recommended that in the section on safety and belonging, that we should also highlight the LGBTIQA+ community members, in addition to those that were highlighted in the initial plan. And then again, last but not least, for sure, we received feedback that we should incorporate photos that are more representative of the diverse communities in Issaquah, some other nuances, accentuate some services, and perhaps increase the frequency for some of the specific action items. Again, a more detailed description is available in your packet, and we are happy to address any questions that you might have. So next, I'll dive a little bit deeper into some of the content edits that we made. So we included, as mentioned before, specific population highlights, both in content and imagery. We included in several areas of the plan references and tied goals to low-income community members who work in minimum wage jobs or in service-related jobs. We also highlighted more seniors and added an additional action item to the existing plan. We also added an additional exhibit that described some of the community needs by population and not just by focus areas. We provided some visual icons for budget categories and some other visual elements. I'm gonna talk a little bit about that in just a minute, and some additional edits and really content review and typos and so forth. So next slide, please. Thank you. So what you see on your screen right now is an example of a visual element that we created for this plan. To accomplish this, we contracted with a graphic design company to create a few visual elements for the plan. So this is one of them. As a side note, you may recall from our previous presentation that the work on the Human Services Strategic Plan was accomplished internally by Human Services staff in collaboration with our communications coordinator, Thomas Rush, and with our management analyst, Dale Markey-Krim. So we are very, very appreciative of their support. So what you see again on your screen is what we call the plan on a page, which just describes in a brief visual how the focus areas, how the vision and our hope for Issaquah informs the focus areas, which then in return inform the goals, the strategic approaches, and the actions. So next slide, please, Hannah. Thank you. So creating icons for funding categories, it's also one of the other elements that we contracted with an outside graphic design company. One of the main recommendations that we received from City Council was to include budget-related information in the plan. So therefore, based on the funding needs, the priorities that we outline in the strategic plan may be included in 3 categories. And you're going to see these highlighted with these colorful icons in the plan. So the orange icon is going to be noted next to initiatives that can be implemented with existing human services staffing resources. Then you're going to see the blue icon that includes initiatives that can be funded through the Human Services Grant Program. And third, the green icon is going to represent those initiatives that require additional one-time or ongoing funding sources. And these sources can be any combination of local, regional, state, federal grants or private funds. Even further, you're going to see in the plan that we indicated a range of funds next to the various action items, and we divided these into 3 categories as well. You're going to see the $ symbol marked by 1, 2, or 3, 1 indicating a base funding level of up to $50,000, $2 indicating a medium level funding, and the range for this is between $50,000 and $200,000, or larger investments that would be above $200,000. And again, these large investments would require additional funding from state, local, or private donations. Next slide, please, Hannah. Here I would like to talk just a little bit and highlight the relationship between the strategic plan and the budget, and the way we envisioned this work. So our goal for the strategic plan was really to highlight the community needs and identify the goals to address them. For us, we developed these with the need of the community in mind, and not with the resources available. So on our end, regardless of the resources available, we hope that this document represents a snapshot, if you will, of the current needs in Issaquah, and then a proposed plan to address them. And that's why we see the budget being a process or a mechanism to look at what financial resources are available and to identify the goals that can be addressed with the resources available. So without complicating myself into what I'm trying to say, I think really we see that the strategic plan informs the budget process, but really it's the budget who's going to make those financial allocations based on the resources available. And so with that, next, our hope and plan is to return to City Council. Next slide, please, Hannah, if you don't mind. Thank you. And so our hope and plan is to return to City Council for adoption either on February 22nd or March 7th, depending on your input and feedback. Then we would also return to City Council for direction on the Human Services Grant Program So trying to separate this from the strategic plan. We currently have a placeholder for this on April 24th. We are, however, flexible depending on your input. And then last but not least, we would also love to continue discussion on resources needed and include specific strategic plan actions in the 2023 budget process. And that concludes our presentation. We are available for questions. And on the screen, again, you see the two questions that we proposed to you tonight. Does this version of the plan reflect the feedback? And then are there any additional changes that you recommend prior to us returning to City Council for possible adoption? Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so very, very much. Councilmember Martz has a comment, but I wonder if we want to take questions first, or Councilmember Martz, is that a question and comment or just a comment?
No, just ready. I'm happy to wait if there's still questions to be.
All right, let's just see if there are questions first. Anybody have questions that you'd like to ask about the strategic plan, strategic human services plan? Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. We did receive a email comment about the connection to the comp plan, and I had emailed my question about this, but I wondered if you could just review for the group that's watching about what the connection is or how we will update the comp plan part about human services, which at this point is different than what's in the human services strategic plan.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Council Member Hunt. So we see the human services strategic plan as compared to the comprehensive plan as the short-term plan, right? The comprehensive plan is this long-range 20-some-year plan, whereas the strategic plan is the shorter 5-year plan. We definitely try to ensure that we align with existing items in the comprehensive plan. However, we do recognize that at this time, there are some elements that are more specific in the strategic plan that would be great to integrate them further in the comprehensive plan. And so our proposal is we are already actually working with our colleagues from the community planning and development, and we will include this in the plan update for next year. However, the human services elements in the comprehensive plan are broad enough to where we are still in compliance with the comprehensive plan, and we don't see need to update the comprehensive plan prior to adopting the strategic plan, the human services strategic plan. Thank you.
Councilmember Hunt, did that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? So we usually take public comment prior to comments from the council. City Clerk, are there any people wanting to make comment on this particular agenda item?
Councilmember DeMichelle, I do not see any hands raised of the attendees in attendance.
Okay. Should we wait just a little bit, or?
At your pleasure.
All right, I'll just speak very, very slowly. All right. Councilmember Martz, why don't we start with you?
Thanks. And I have fairly extensive comments, but I'm going to try to keep myself to the same length that we afford members of the community. So I'm going to try to keep myself to under 5 minutes, but they're really kind of extensive. So when you talk about performance measures, there's really sort of 4 levels of performance measures. You've got quantitative input, qualitative input, quantitative output, and qualitative output. So let's use an example, Mount Everest. A quantitative input would be how many bottles of oxygen, how much food, how many hours of climbing are you going to do today? Qualitative input would be how much of the oxygen is on the mountain, how much of the food, how many hours of climbing did we expect to perform versus what we did. Quantitative output is how many feet did we go up the mountain today? How many climbers turned back? How many climbers got high altitude pulmonary edema? And then the fourth level is qualitative output. How far up the mountain did we get? Are we going to get to the top by our turnaround time? Will we get back by dark? Will we have enough guides for the full day? Do we have enough oxygen and food for more than one summit bid? So that's sort of the hierarchy of levels of utility of a metric. Now let's put that on a human services project. Level one would be how many hours did we bill? How many people were hired? How much stuff was purchased? Qualitative input would be how much of our budget did we spend? How many of our hires did we make? Are we on track on the input side? Quantitative output, how many people were helped? How much stuff was distributed? And then finally, level four, how much of the problem was solved and what was the cost per unit impact to solve? And so what I would maintain is when I look at the measuring success uh, measurements in this packet, what I see is a lot of stuff in the 1 and the 2, and a few things in the level 3, and really not much at all in the level 4. And it's really about what's the magnitude of the problem and how much are we moving the needle, and what's it taking to move the needle. And so I would really ask if there's a way to get more into that output side of the house than the input side. There's a lot of the input. There's how much are we, how many fire engines are we putting on this fire, to use yet a third analogy. So that's my concern. I see a lot of stuff on the input side, not a lot of stuff on the output side. And what I really want is, what's the magnitude of this particular problem? How much are we moving the needle, and what's it taking to move the needle? So that's what I'm looking for, and I did it in 2 minutes 30 seconds. Thank you.
Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. I had similar comments, and first I wanted to say that I think the comments from last time, especially the comments about the need for some information about the financial impacts of different actions, I think that those comments were taken on board, and I think that has strengthened and made this a more actionable strategic plan. So I wanted to first of all say that I appreciated that. My comments were also on the performance metrics, and specifically, I agree with the analogies that were made. I think that there's a mix of some actions in the performance measures, and some are more about how many people are served, which I think in this case is an important thing for us to be measuring and keeping information on, because one of the key issues that's identified throughout the plan is that people aren't aware of services. So I think that keeping track of how many people are being served over time and is the word getting out, that's valuable. But there's also some performance measures, like one of them is creation of a multi-service resource center. That's also exactly an action. It's performance measure 6, but there's also an action 1.1 that is creation of a multi-service resource center. So that one in particular is a good example because it's a expensive proposition. It's one of the most expensive, identified as one of the most expensive in the plan, and I think it could be really important. But in that case, I think we should really have, what is the outcome? What's the performance measure? What's the outcome that we want to see from this action? So I think what I would ask is, if you and your team, and maybe also the performance measurement specialist, Dale Markey-Crimp, if you worked together to review that list and think, for some of them that are these more action performance measures, what's the actual why of why we would take this action? What's the thing that we want to achieve with that? How much of the problem are we trying to solve would also be great to know. But I think, to make it more measurable, I think it would be great to think through, how many people are we trying to serve? What is the actual measurements that we can make to see if this is having the desired impact? And then also, one other one that I think it would be great to do a review of the whole list, but one other one that I would especially ask to be reviewed is the number of policy recommendations, which is number 20, because simply having a number of policy recommendations from from my seat as one of the policy makers in this body, I think we should have a measurement of success or a measurement of progress that's different than simply the number of actions that we've taken. But again, thank you for taking our comments on board last time, and I really appreciate this plan.
Council President Walsh.
Thank you. This is Council President Walsh. I appreciate the comments that I have heard so far. I do think that they are comments that can be taken and used to, pull a plan together, but, make tweaks to the outcome and the end point and, what we're looking for. But I want to take a step back and just say, I really appreciate what this plan is, the work that it took to get there, and then also the adjustments that you guys have made since the last meeting. I think giving a clearer understanding of what can be accomplished with our current resources versus what is going to potentially be a budget ask or something that's going to require additional budget is fantastic. On the idea of the metrics and, the performance measures, I think I wouldn't wholeheartedly look at, what are the outcomes. I think it's important to also look at leading metrics, things that influence the future results. Otherwise, you're only looking at the lagging metrics, the things that you've done, but that are still in the past. So I would look at a mix of indicators that show what your performance is and also where you're going. But I do think that there are some ideas there that could be used to tweak some of those concepts. Thanks.
Additional comments from the council. Deputy Council President Hall.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Hall here. I really appreciate speakers who came before me talking about the performance metrics, definitely things that I didn't consider, and I think very insightful as we move to the next step in developing this plan. I do want to say, though, that I think it would behoove us to keep performance metrics tied to the actions that are actually laid out in this plan. So for example, if one of the outcomes that we want is homelessness is down X% or homelessness is at 0 or something like that, that's not necessarily, but this plan has a very specific description of what our role in the human services community in the county is. So if we implement all of the actions, not everything's going to be solved. So I think it's just important that we recognize that and design our metrics in a way that are effective for us understanding if our actions are actually successful or our outcomes are successfully prepared with the actions that we have. So anyways, I have more comments because I'm very, 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 very happy with this plan. I want to say that I think this update meets both my needs as a council member and also the needs of the community at large by one, over here articulating a comprehensive strategy for understanding and mapping gaps in human services needs that exist in the city, but also clearly describing, like I said, the city's role as a funder, a connector, I think an advocate, a collaborator. It also acknowledges that we don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel when services can be and have been provided by other government and nonprofit partners in King County. It's also ambitious in its scoping of the problem, which is a good thing, because before we can approach any kind of comprehensive problem solving as a government, we first have to have a good understanding of the full scope of the need in our community and the gaps in the needs in our community. And I think this plan does that and definitely informs future budgeting work. Some of these comments would really be better at final passage, but I'm just going to say it because I'm so excited about it. It's also shocking. Parts of it are shocking. the data on residents living in poverty alone and how disproportionately those residents are people of color is in and of itself a call to action for us, 100%. It's very well done. I appreciate all the outreach and engagement that was done with the community, with our partners, with the Human Services Commission. Definitely considers equity. It tells a very compelling story, like I said, with the data, and paints this picture of the need of where we need to go for human services actions here in Issaquah. So definitely thank you to Monica and Hannah for all your passionate work in this effort. I also want to thank Director Watling for the vision that he provides this department that always seems to be aligned with best practices, emerging needs, and where the council wants to go. So anyways, where I'm sitting, I think maybe some fine tuning of the performance metrics is interesting. I'm interested in seeing what those might look like. But other than that, I was gonna say, I don't think this necessarily needs another study session touch, in my opinion. I personally feel like I'm ready to go, but open to what the rest of the council members' needs are as we move forward. And thank you very much.
Councilmember Joe is up next.
Thank you, Councilmember Joe here. First, I want to congratulate the Human Services work that's been done. Monica, your team is doing great work. I'll share with you that when I went on a ride along with our police officers about a week and a half ago, they were effusive in their compliments to the Human Services personnel, the way that you're quickly able to get out when there's a referral by the police officers, or there's someone in need. Hannah and Amir did just wonderful work getting out during the blizzard to meet people where they were and get them services that they needed. And I think that when we're talking about metrics for human services, it is a little bit difficult because you're talking about changing one life at a time, or changing the direction or the trajectory of one person at a time. And so while we might get caught up in numbers and all sorts of different outputs, sometimes we don't see the result of the outputs and the result of the efforts that we make in human services until years down the road, when a high school homeless person comes back and says, you know what, when you guys got me into a shelter when I was 17, I got my life back in order and I was able to go to technical college, and on and on, those elements build on themselves. We don't hear about it necessarily because they've gone on to a better life. So I think that the individual stories that we might get back from the police officers that you're teaming up with, or the youth that come back and talk to us, those are the results that we're going to see. It's not going to be just next budget session or next year, but the plan needs to be, it needs to have a long vision to it. 3 to 5 years out, maybe even 10 years out, we're not necessarily going to see the results. So I just encourage the council members to think a little bit more about just not what's going to happen next year and we're going to see for a reduction in numbers or an improvement in numbers, but the individual lives that we're going to change and how it's going to come back to make Issaquah a special place where people care. So that's just my comment tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Joe. Any additional comments from anyone else? Well, good. I get to talk. From my point of view, it's very hard to call a government document beautiful, but I'm going to call this a very beautiful document. I'm very, very happy with it. I do take the comments that were made about measurements, I think are useful comments. But I do want to, one of the things I love about this document is the phrase shared responsibility. And I think it's been the model that the city of Issaquah has used for a long time. We're not necessarily in charge of every outcome because we don't fund directly a lot of service. We work and we collaborate, we share, we guide, we advise. As you put it in the plan, our role is really not necessarily the direct service, but being there often to support the agencies that do carry out the direct service. So that shared responsibility that you talk about in the plan, it means that it's not just the city and it's not just the agencies and it's not just our community at large and it's not the state, it's not the federal. It includes everybody and includes those who are in need and are requesting help where appropriate. We all have a shared responsibility to try and move things forward together. So this plan, I think, is just lovely in its expression of how the city of Issaquah interacts with the human service agencies that serve our community. I really took to heart as well the comment about the funding, because that has been my concern is, do we have enough funding to meet the needs? And I really want to thank Monica Negrilla for pointing out that the plan itself is really pointing out the needs, and we may not be able to fund everything that we would like to fund, but we will at least know what areas we are falling short and which areas we really need collaborative relationship with other agencies, and where we could possibly go in the future. And so I appreciate those comments. I am looking forward to the discussion on April the 24th. And I think my only comment there, or question perhaps, is that going to be too late to meet the needs of the grant program? So at any rate, I'm very happy with this. And like Councilmember Hall, I feel like I could vote to adopt this plan right now, but I would, I will, Councilmember Martz and Councilmember Hunt's comments, I would like to see if you want to review those outcomes. There may be some stronger statements that could be created there, but I think overall it's a very, very worthy effort. Really appreciate all the public input and the community outreach that you did to get where it is. So those are my comments. Any additional comments? Councilmember Martz, round two.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, we're not going to vote on it tonight anyhow. So I would just love the administration to take a look at this question around inputs and outputs. They're both needed. I forwarded on my questions or the formatting of sort of how I think about these things, and I don't have questions with the uh, bulk of the report. I just would love to see a little bit more, just one turn on those metrics around making sure that we get enough both absolute outputs and what I think of as qualitative outputs as well, which is like, how are we doing against the size of the problem, right? That's I think those are important as well. They're all needed. Thanks.
Yeah, appreciate that. Any other comments before we move on to the next agenda item? All right, I'm just going to, a very short summary. It sounded to me that there was a majority of people would like to at least have the let's see, is the right word, goals, or the outcomes reviewed, perhaps strengthened. And so before it comes back to us, that might happen. But overall, people are very happy with the plan. And so the timing of it will leave to the administration, whether you want to bring it back February 22nd or in March. And anybody want to add to that summary? It seems like the main focus was on the outcome statements. It's like everybody agrees. All right. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Good evening.
Right. All right. Our next agenda item is the council structure options. And this will be presented by Tisha Gieser, our city clerk. Before Tisha starts, I just wanted to just take a little pause and say, looking over this as the chair of tonight's session, just a little concerned about the number of questions that we have to answer and whether or not we're going to provide the administration with some really clear directions. And so I'm just wanting to ask if it's all right to structure this around the 4 questions that were in the packet and take each one of those questions separately at the end. Does that sound like a good way to proceed? And maybe we will even use the thumbs up, thumbs down process for part of this agenda item. So any comments or concerns about taking that approach before we begin? Not seeing any hands or comments in the chat. All right, and Tisha is going to help me also. We have a lot of information to be put in front of us here. So both Tisha and I will be taking notes to make sure we don't miss anybody's comments. So Tisha, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, Council. This is Tisha Gieser, City Clerk, and tonight I'm looking forward to talking to you about your legislative structure. So tonight there are quite a few questions. We are anticipating that this is a 2-part conversation, and so tonight is the first of that 2-part conversation. We anticipate further talking with you at the March 1st Council meeting. At tonight's meeting, we're looking to get your support for 2 overarching changes, which are transitioning to written informational updates and establishing council listening sessions. We're also looking to get your initial direction on which of the 3 legislative options you might be interested in drilling further into. We'd like to identify if there's any information you need us to come back with for further discussion on March 1st. And we'd like to pinpoint what to focus that March 1st conversation on. So for a little background, in late 2019, the City Council overhauled its rules of procedure. We had a Council Rules Ad Hoc Committee and the Clerk's Office that basically rewrote and updated the Council rules. And that included a shift from standing committees and a work session and Council Committee of the Whole model to today's legislative structure, which is our twice monthly study session model with ad hoc committees as needed. When that change happened late in 2019, there was a commitment to revisit the study session legislative structure in 2020, and then COVID happened and priorities shifted, and conversation was brought up again at the January 25th Council Retreat, where one of the main items that you discussed was your satisfaction level with the current legislative structure and some of the problem areas that you saw with it. So this slide is showing, if you recall, you brainstormed and identified a number of different problem areas, with these 3 kind of being the focus of your discussion. On this slide are some of the other thoughts that were shared during that meeting. And following your discussion, you asked staff to bring forward some legislative options. So we took your input into account, as well as some observations and lessons learned ourselves to provide these 3 options for consideration tonight. Before we go into the options themselves, there are a couple things I'd like to cover. When we're talking about these legislative options, it's helpful to have some vocabulary that we're using to kind of break our work plan items down and frame them up. So tonight, I'll be talking in terms of policy level of your the city's work plan items. This is a mechanism we employed when we shifted from the committee structure in 2019. Basically, low-level policy items are items that have very little policy flexibility or input. Often they're required. These are items that are going directly to your consent calendar from adoption, or occasionally under regular business, you might have a brief presentation, but these are typically items that have one council touch point. Mid-level policy items are items that have more significant budgetary or community impacts, and there is some policy flexibility. And these are limited to a specific policy area, like mobility or safety. High-level policy items, we're considering those to be items that have significant budgetary or community impact and or are sort of overarching. So they encompass a number of different disciplines. So those are things like the strategic plan, the budget, performance measurements. And here are a couple of examples on this slide here. These are some of your 2020 work plan items. This is an imperfect mechanism, but it's an attempt to try and figure out how to funnel the city's work plan items into our legislative structure. The other sort of framework I'll be talking about in respect to these options are phases of review. So these are pretty straightforward. We come to you to seek your direction on items. At times there is a review phase, and then there's typically always an act phase. For those low-level policy items, this often occurs at one meeting. For other items, like the item that you just considered, there will be 3 meetings. There's one meeting per phase. So it really varies per item, but we'll be talking in terms of these phases throughout the options. So as I mentioned earlier, there's 2 overarching changes that we'd like to recommend based on your input at the council retreat, and these are irrespective of a legislative option. So one of them is transitioning your informational updates. This is feedback we heard at the February 1st council study session, where we heard that for items that you are expected to provide a policy direction on, that you would absolutely like to receive informative materials in a presentation. But in the case of receiving passive updates, that it is sufficient to have written information provided. This is something that we've started with those quarterly work plan reports that we've been including on the consent calendar at council meetings. As part of this recommendation, we would be expanding that to encompass other updates provided on large projects or other items of interest. They would be provided in writing, included with the agenda materials. Questions could be posed by council to staff by email. If there was interest in having more public discussion, the item could be brought down from the consent calendar for questions or some light discussion at a council meeting. So that's one of the proposals that we would like to get your direction on moving forward. The second overarching change that we're recommending based on input is a quarterly community listening session. This is around the problem area that was identified around public dialogue and sort of the restrictiveness of public comment being taken at council meetings in a formal, time-limited, often agenda-specific way. So these community listening sessions would technically be special council meetings. They would be facilitated by the mayor. They would provide an opportunity for more informal, open-ended dialogue with the community on topics of their interest, and might include an informational presentation if there was deemed to be some, a high level of community interest. These sessions, we feel, would be a good candidate for remote meetings. It's been thought in the past that it could be valuable to bring council to the community and hold some meetings at various parts of the city. And we feel that this meeting would be very conducive to that. We would not plan to have a very formal prescriptive agenda for these meetings, but rather would include the quarterly city work plan updates and capital project updates, and have it be more of an open format meeting. All right, so those are the 2 overarching changes, and now we'll move into the 3 legislative options. I would like to start off by saying, and this is probably presumed, but these are by far not your only options, but this is a starting point for 3 different tracks, and there can certainly be some modifications proposed to any of them. All right, the first study session with adjustments is essentially the status quo option with some tweaking. So the first two items listed here are not changes. You've just heard a bit about the listening sessions, and I'll talk to you in just a moment about sort of the process of bringing items to council meetings. I'd like to touch quickly on the bottom three items as they are outcomes of input we heard. The first is regarding voting. So one of the things we heard at the retreat is that it can be difficult with 7 of you to determine what consensus is at your study sessions, especially if a new idea emerges midway through your providing input. So we would encourage, and your council rules allow, for doing some informal voting or even formal voting at your meetings. What is not allowed at study sessions is taking final action. But the council rules specifically say that votes can be taken to provide direction to the administration or to forward an item to a council meeting. So we would encourage more use of either voting, that could be a voice vote. It doesn't need to be the formal roll call vote we take at council meetings when you're acting on something. It could be something like all in favor say aye, all in favor say no. A majority supports this, or it could be the even less formal thumbs up, thumbs down, provided that the council member facilitating just sort of verbalized, the outcome of that. The next thing we'd recommend is regarding next steps. We heard that those aren't always clear. We'd like to propose, you see we include an outline under each of your study session items that sort of bullets out staff presentation, council Q&A, public comment. We would add next steps as the last item. After you provided your direction, staff would summarize the next steps, which would be helpful because often the next steps look different based on your direction. The last item, ad hoc committees, I will touch on in just a moment. I wanted to take a minute to talk about the flow of items as they come to you, because there was a pretty significant change in 2019 when the council adopted its new rules. So prior to that time, when the administration had a proposal for the council, an agenda bill was crafted. That was step 1. The agenda bill was crafted, it went to council. Council then often referred the agenda bill to a committee. The committee then did its review, provided its direction, did its review, and often proposed, significant modifications. The agenda bill was then modified in a track changes way to reflect that input and brought back to the council for action. When we shifted the council's legislative structure, one of the things we wanted to do differently is to get the council input earlier, before that proposal was baked in an agenda bill. And so that's when we moved to using what we call IDs, really they're staff reports, which are designed to give you the information you need to provide policy input and are the first step. In this model, which we're proposing for all 3 of these legislative options, your input is sought at the study session, or it could be at a committee under these other options. And then the agenda bill is drafted as an outcome and incorporates your feedback and direction. And again, this is something that we would hope to continue in all 3 of these legislative options. One of the other things that we would like to propose changing as option 1, your status quo option, is ad hoc committees. It has been a learning experience to have ad hoc committees. They're great because they're very flexible, and there's been quite a variety of items that have been referred to ad hoc committees since the transition to study sessions. But we would recommend and would like to commit to providing a little firmer framework when these ad hoc committees are established. So some of the things that we've heard is it's important to provide very specific scope, reporting, not even reporting time frame, but reporting mechanism. Is it at a meeting? Is it in writing? And also the sort of the format of the meeting. Is the meeting recorded? Are the materials published? So these are some of the things that we would recommend moving forward, and that we would help prompt when an ad hoc committee is established to think through a little further some of those aspects of the ad hoc committee. This is a summary of option 1 that just shows it in light of the policy options and phases of review. The next option I'm calling committees squared. I did make a correction to this slide. I noticed that it was inconsistent with the staff report, so you'll see that change here. We are recommending 2 types of committees as in this option, if you are to choose this option, a committee option. It would consist of 4 standing committees and then 1 committee of the whole, which would meet monthly. Under this option, ad hoc committees would be eliminated. We would propose 4 standing committees. These align with the strategic plan goal areas, except public safety and human services are sort of pulled out of the city services strategic plan goal area. It would be proposed that these committees would meet monthly and that they would consist of 3 council members each. You had asked for a look at how the city's boards and commissions might align under these committees, and this is a look at how this could look based on the 4 committees identified. We would propose handling the committee process a little differently than how it worked prior in 2019 and prior. So our recommendation would be to define in the council rules of procedure which items, based on sort of subject matter and where they fall in that policy level, would be referred to committee. And items would automatically go from the city work plan to a committee. There wouldn't be a formal referral process. So the council rules would be sort of enacting that. And there certainly would need to be a mechanism if a judgment call needed to be made. Once an item went to committee, it would go there in the form of a staff report, similar to how items go to you in study session now, and the committee would direct and review. The committee would report out on the item, an agenda bill would be drafted and come to council for action. Under both options 2 and 3, we have some time to flesh things out tonight and at the March 1st study session, but I think it likely, especially with options 2 and 3, there are a lot of mechanics involved, and a council rules ad hoc committee would likely be needed to sort of finesse some of these mechanics. Here is a summary of option 2. So you'll see here that the policy levels sort of dictate what the format is. So for those mid-level policy items, based on sort of their subject area, as I mentioned, they would automatically be referred to the committees. Those high-level overarching items would go to your committee of the whole meetings, which again would be held monthly as needed. The third option we're calling a hybrid option. It's a hybrid between options 1 and 2. So under this option, there would be 2 monthly study sessions, but there would also be standing committees which would meet as needed. Quarterly listening sessions could be an element of any of these options, but under this option, ad hoc committees would also be eliminated. The way that this hybrid could work is that items would go to study session automatically, just as they do now. But if it was determined at a study session that additional work was needed on one of those items, there would be the option to refer it to one of the standing committees that would already have been sort of appointed and in place and at the ready. That's the most significant difference between this option and option 1, is that instead of creating an ad hoc committee as needed, you would sort of have these standing committees in the wings. So either the study session or the committee would provide that direction of review, the recommendation, agenda bill would be crafted and come to council for action. This is a summary of option 3. So, either mid-level items could go to either study session or committee, and feasibly high-level items could as well. There would be discretion of the council to refer items to those standing committees. Some minor corrections were also made to this meeting frequency slide. So this is just a snapshot of what these options could look like in terms of meetings. There are certainly variables. There are the most variables under option 3 because the committees would be convened as needed. We anticipate they would not be meeting monthly. However, there's some variability in option 2 as well. It may be that depending on the city's work plan items, that those standing committees would not need to meet monthly. You'll see a notation here that with the 4 standing committees, there would be 2 council members who would only serve on 1 committee, and 5 council members would serve on 2, which is how we come up with those estimates per month. These are just a couple of calendars. These aren't necessarily, actual dates that we would be using, even though I think they closely resemble the kind of schedule we would be aiming for. But they're intended to just give you a sense of what it might look like under these options. Let me move through these other slides here. You'll see that our goal would be to try and keep the council meetings and committee meetings and whatnot on Mondays and Tuesdays if possible. This is partly for predictability for your schedules. This is also because we have 14 advisory boards and commissions, and they by and large meet on Wednesdays and Thursdays. You may anticipate that on months where there are holidays, this will pose some scheduling challenges, and we will be talking to you at the March 1st council meeting about a recommendation by the city's equity board regarding some acknowledgement of cultural and religious holidays. So it is something to keep in mind. Under options 2 and 3, there is the potential for a pretty significant number of meetings. This is a pros and cons chart, which does not capture all of the pros and cons. It captures some of the comments we heard from you at the council retreat, as well as some observations from the administration. I just wanted to touch on 2 things quickly here. One is under the cons, the transition to hybrid meetings and a more complex legislative structure. So coming up in the next 2 months, we have an exciting transition to a whole new form of meeting, which will become our new norm, which will be hybrid meetings. These are going to be more complicated meetings, and the timing of a transition to a legislative structure, which is more meeting intensive, will pose some challenges if that transition is made at this time, given, again, this entire new meeting structure for us. So I did highlight that here as at least a short-term consideration regarding timing. Another aspect I wanted to touch on briefly as the city clerk are the Open Public Meetings Act considerations. I know you received training on February 1st, but I wanted to quickly touch on what this means for council members if a transition to committees occurs. So under the Open Public Meetings Act, committees don't by themselves fall under the OPMA. Your ad hoc committees don't fall under the OPMA because they don't take public comment. So if committees take public comment, the OPMA is triggered. And what that means is if you have committees of 3, a quorum of the committee is 2. And it means that 2 council members who serve on the same committee need to be careful to not talk about committee business outside of a committee meeting. And so that's just an added consideration for you as council members is if options 2 or 3 are pursued. As I mentioned, we are soon, hopefully, transitioning to hybrid meetings, which is very exciting, but it certainly does come with some space considerations. With the closure of our City Hall Northwest facility, we've lost 2 of the meeting rooms that were most frequently used by our boards and commissions, the Eagle Room and the Pickering Room. So if there is a transition to options 2 and 3 and more monthly meetings by the council, we would anticipate needing to create one more virtual meeting room. We have a couple thoughts about where that could be, and that would allow both the council and another board and commission to meet and have a virtual meeting at the same time. We would also be requesting some dollars to ensure that we could provide recording and live streaming of your meetings and some of that virtual meeting support that both our ICTV staff and the clerk's office provide. So as I mentioned earlier, these are the things that we're looking for from you tonight. And again, as I mentioned, we look forward to continuing hearing from you and continuing to converse on this issue at the March 1st council meeting. And with that, my presentation is complete and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Tisha. And before we go to those 4 questions or take public comment, let's or the 4 questions where administration is asking for input. Do you have any questions for Tisha? Councilmember Ray.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. This is Chris Ray. A couple of questions. One is the committee squared option does not have ad hocs. Could it have ad hocs if something came up? I mean, I was thinking kind of initially like long-term finance ad hoc, but we might have others. So would that be an option to have ad hocs also?
It certainly would. Yes, there's some mixing and matching that can happen here at council's direction. Absolutely.
And can you just talk for a minute about what the hybrid meetings would look like and when that would happen and what that means? Because I'm a little bit fuzzy on that.
And Councilmember Ray, are you talking about my reference to the complexity of hybrid meetings?
Yes.
Right. So we heard from the council and feel committed as an agency, and I seek City Administrator Bob Quitz might want to add comments, but to allowing ongoing virtual participation by the community as the council transitions to in-person meetings. And so we will be looking to support virtual attendance of the public and potentially staff, and during the emergency, potentially council members for the near term and from the public in the long term. And so it just adds an element to our meetings, sort of running to almost to tandem meetings and so from a technical and operational perspective to allow that to happen.
That's great. Thanks for that's exactly the clarity I was looking for. Thank you.
And Councilmember DiMichele, if I could just add
Sure.
briefly to that. We have operated prior to the pandemic really with the Deputy City Clerk handling the affairs of the meeting. Just the couple of meetings that we did in hybrid mode, I mean, it was a nearly impossible task to manage the meeting and manage the technology. So we anticipate, certainly for the foreseeable future, needing 2 staff members to help not only with the meeting itself, but also with the technology, the hybrid piece of that, in addition to with the council staff from ICTV. So there would be a cost to that. You know, we have also been thinking, you know, what does hybrid mean for boarding commissions? And quite honestly, we're really not prepared to make recommendations yet at this point because the logistics could be daunting for, what is it, 14 separate boards and commissions if they all met hybrid every month. Even without the cable TV piece of that, we don't currently have anywhere close to the staffing to do that for 14 boards and commissions monthly. So we just want to be very transparent with you and the community as you're making these decisions that, you know, some of these processes come with additional expenses, and we need to be, you know, we have a very talented city clerk and a very talented city clerk staff, but they are only human and only can do so much, and we just want to make sure that we're as transparent as possible about that with you.
Thank you. Any additional questions, Councilmember Ray?
No, that's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Council President Walsh.
Thank you. Tisha, can you remind me what our meeting schedule was previously when we had committees? I seem to remember work sessions monthly and then council of the whole quarterly, but I don't think that's what's being proposed here. So can you talk about what the difference is and what it was before?
Certainly, and I'll do my best. That's my recollection as well. Quarterly committee of the whole meetings, monthly work sessions, even though I'm teetering on them potentially being twice a month, and Councilmember Martz may be able to recall, and then our 3 standing committee meetings. So this would be a shift. My observation previously was there was confusion about what was different between a committee of the whole versus a work session, and really, there, you know, I did use that term, committee of the whole, but in all respects, it would essentially be a study session. It's you communicating in a less formal, more roll your sleeves up and let's talk through these issues way. And that's the committee of the whole would be structured the same way. We anticipate that you would be seated in a similar way and that it would be chaired by the council president. So there would be an increase to the standing committees. There would be a reduction in that all council member work session or committee of the whole. We would only have one committee of the whole meeting monthly under the committee squared proposal.
Okay, I'm gonna have to think through and think about my questions as that relates to the hybrid option, but that answers it for now. Thank you.
Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. I had some questions on the listening session. The way it was described, it sounds a little bit like community meetings. Some HOAs have meetings, and sometimes the mayor and council members would attend those. And I wondered if the administration's proposal is to sort of formalize that kind of meeting where we talk with neighborhoods specifically about their neighborhood concerns, or more of a town hall. So I guess I just wanted more information about how those would be scheduled and planned, and what the motivation would be like for organizing those. And then also, I assume they wouldn't be recorded the same way, but because it would be in a new location each time. But I wanted to check on that as well.
Councilmember DiMichele, why don't you let me take a first crack at that, and the city clerk can add. We heard during your previous discussion the desire to have that kind of more regular interaction with members of the public. So this proposal is coming from that. I think the council can do this in a number of different ways. I think it's probably very important to, in some respects, keep the agenda very clear, so if members of the public can come with anything that's on their mind. We would then have a complement of city staff available at those meetings to answer questions, and then to have a dialogue. So if there's back and forth, there would be back and forth. Mayor Pauly is interested in taking the city council on the road. That was something we were planning to do in 2020, and of course we're not able to do, but we would like to do that. She would like to do that again as soon as practical. And so my guess is that there would be elements of that sort of community meeting more with that, taking the council on the road from time to time. But I think it could be fluid. But the bottom line of the proposal really is to give the community some regular time that they know if someone wants to come and talk about a particular issue that is of concern to them, they can come and get a response. The council can ask follow-up questions. That's a fixed time on a calendar during the course of a year. So that was the motivation behind the proposal.
Councilmember Hunt, did you get your question answered?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Deputy Council President Hall.
Thank you very much, Zach Hall here. Just a quick question I thought of. I noticed in the recommendations that it would include, at least in part, committees, didn't have any recommendations regarding chairs. And I know that there were specific, at least I think so, specific chairs per committees previously. I personally think the rotating chair has worked really nicely for study sessions, but I'm curious, number one, if the administration has a recommendation on how chairs would play into this if we wanted to go with option 2 or 3. There was a second part to that question I've lost. So maybe answer that first.
Deputy Council President, I think the administration's position would be that that's a council business matter.
That was my second question. Or is that still left up to kind of a policy discussion amongst council to have? Okay, so you've answered that. Never mind that. Thank you.
Councilmember Hunt.
Thanks. I realized that the second part of my question also, I think, got a little bit lost. So the second part of my question on listening sessions was about recording. I assume that if we're on the road going to different neighborhoods, we would not record. It would not be on cable TV, and just wanted to confirm that. And probably also, depending on the location, probably also not able to be hybrid with people calling in, et cetera.
Councilmember Hunt, members of the council, I don't know that that's accurate. I think that we would do everything we can to record every meeting that the council has. I think that it gets very difficult to decide which meetings you record and which ones you don't record. We have tried our best to record pretty much everything. If we have the technical capability to stream it live, we will do that. As we go on the road, I think we would want to do that. The only caveat to that is that other communities that have this sort of open mic type event sometimes find that there are unintended consequences to that, and then the councils then have to reassess the policy. That if a small group of individuals come and use that as a platform that perhaps is not addressing either issues directly before the council or issues that the council has jurisdiction over, then I think there are other communities that come up with other guidelines for that. We're not proposing any strict guidelines for the purposes of the discussion this evening, but I will tell you that my experience is that it doesn't always work out in a pure democracy, collegial sort of way like we would all hope. And so sometimes you have to make adjustments accordingly.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I had a couple of questions. One was, the first one was a clarification, I think, on using thumbs up, thumbs down, votes, etc. at study sessions. I've heard this referred to as a kind of a straw vote. I think it needs to be really clear that those votes don't quote unquote count, and council members are free to change their mind between the study session and when it comes before the council for a final vote. So, and I don't know whether we can come up with some wording on that or not, but at any rate, I guess my question is that a correct interpretation of those votes at study sessions?
Councilmember DiMichele, members of the council, I think it is providing general direction. I don't have a dictionary or Google in front of me about what a textbook definition of a straw vote would be. My sense is that there perhaps is a little bit of a difference than just general direction. Straw votes are often considered some sort of preliminary vote. And I think that that's not how the Issaquah Council has used the thumb up and thumbs down. I think it has been much more directional, understanding, as I think you said, that it's not a final vote and that a final vote is at some later point. So I'm happy, unless this has already done it, to Google straw vote to see if I'm characterizing an appropriate view of this. But I think there is a difference, and I think quite honestly, from my observation, the thumbs up, thumbs down as general direction is probably more with the intent of the council than anything that might be more specific.
Yeah, we might want to write. Might want to put it into some kind of definition so that we all have the same understanding of what we're doing when we do that. So, and then my second question is, I noticed on the committee structure that one of them was public safety and human services, and another one had transportation as part of its duty. And we have a transportation board and we have a human services commission. And so I'm just wondering, has there been discussion about not duplicating the effort of our boards and commissions in these council committees, or how does that work?
If that's directed to the administration, Councilmember DiMichele, I'll do my best. I think ultimately it's council decision on how you wish to structure your discussions. 14 boards and commissions is a fair number for a city our size. I think one of the challenges that every community I'm familiar with boards and commissions is making that work meaningful. And so if there's too much duplication, I think then that takes away from the meaningful work sometimes the board and commission members feel that they're spending on that. But ultimately, I think as we've said before, the tonight's discussion leading up until tonight's discussion is what are the issues the council's trying to address? I mean, is there an issue that is not working for the council as far as deliberation? Are you not getting the information you need from boards and commissions? what would drive the council to want to have the committees again? And I think as you answer those questions, some of the details hopefully fall into place. But yes, I think there absolutely could be duplication. Some communities, some city councils may think that that's perfectly appropriate. Others would say that's why we have boards and commissions, so we can look at their thoughtful responses and go from there. There is no right or wrong answer, I don't think, to that.
Right, and I see Councilmember Joe would like to comment, maybe answer that question because you've been on committee, you've had the committee format before, so.
Yes, thank you. That was my thought. One of the advantages of having the committees, for instance, when I was on the services committee, was we would meet with the Human Services Commission about once a year just to try to get a feeling of what's working and what's not, to get the input from the community members that are actually doing the underlying baseline work for the legislation, and try to find out how we can better work together and make sure that they feel appreciated in terms of the work that they're doing for our community. It's often more thankless than the work that we do here on council. And so we want to make sure that they feel part of the team, so to speak, and their contributions are certainly appreciated. And that was one of the reasons to have the committees as we're going forward. And if I could just comment on the structure that I see here, I really like the idea that we're thinking about having committees to discuss issues a little more deeply than perhaps we're able to do in a study session. 3 members are able to, kind of dive a little bit deeper into some things and ask some questions that might not be fully vetted out during a 7-person full committee of the whole meeting as we go forward. So that's kind of my take on things. I'm not in favor of having more meetings, but if they are necessary to make sure that we're completely getting a good conversation about the topics and the issues, then it's part of the job, and it's something that I think we need to fully vet out and see if we want to take that step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Joe, and I'm going to step in here as your chairperson and say, I was hoping that we would take each of the questions separately so that we really give clear direction to the administration. I appreciate your comments. And then we'll come back and address that issue. Councilmember Martz, did you want to comment on my question?
Just to be clear, you're saying you would like us to restrict comment to the first question, which is about whether we want to see info updates and listening sessions?
Well, I'd like to take them in order, or at least try to reach consensus on each one
Okay.
as we go through, if that's possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Certainly. Then I'll restrict myself to that question. Yes and yes.
Okay.
That concludes my comments.
Oh, okay. So before we go to comment, however, we need to stop and see if there's anybody wanting to make public comment. So I'll ask the clerk, is there anybody online wanting to make public comment?
Let us see. I see one hand raised.
Okay.
Ms. Marsh.
All right.
Ms. Marsh, I've made you a panelist. You should be able to speak now. If you see the option to unmute, and you can also turn on your video.
Okay, I'm working on my video. I'm not sure it's there. Can you all hear me? There's a little, okay.
We can
There's
see
the
and
video.
hear you. We can both see and hear you.
There's a lot of little circles going around on all your faces tonight. So Connie Marsh, live on Squawk, and have been through 6 years of these meetings in varying forms. So I can tell you as a member of the public what I see as missing. And what is missing is dialogue. In this format, council members speak past each other, they state their opinion, and then they can never really have a discussion about it that gets in depth. And the community members who speak, they speak and it falls into a void. And unless a council member picks it up and expressly says, I want to know more about this particular thing, a community member has no idea why it wasn't supported, if it just wasn't heard. And so it's disappointing every time. There is also a significant disconnect between the committees and commissions, the community ones, the citizen ones, and the council. And so there's a sense of, well, we're going to do this thing and then council can override it. And they don't really ever get to have a conversation with the council about, you know, what do you think of this and why did you think that and what do we do? And so these smaller formats were much better at least being able to engage in conversation rather than just talking past each other. And it was more equitable or collegial with the community and the council, because right now the council is out there and above us, and we're just trying to get our words across. And it's not very successful. So you can see how many people engage in these council sessions, fewer even than there used to be. So in the presentation, well, I sort of understand it. The lens of the community members was missing and what our needs might better be. We have had town hall meetings before, town hall meetings that don't have a specific agenda as a primary topic don't tend to be very successful because the people want to have a reason to go and then to have a time where then they can engage in dialogue on a secondary topic or a tertiary topic. That works out too, but then also to be able to have sort of a scramble session at the end where the people can just go up and talk to their council members one-on-one and get to know them a little bit and ask them questions specifically rather than the big authoritarian grouping in the front, right? Because most of the people who live in Issaquah now don't know y'all at all. And so I would go for something, you know, more in the range of a flippin' barbecue, right? Something that is neighborhood-like and friendly. And then people can ask their questions to you either as a whole or then individually. I feel your pain with an in-house and tech-oriented meeting. Those didn't work very well the first time because it's really, really hard. I hope it works better this time. Council as a whole, in the past, was mainly used for presentations without much questions. They were sort of long information sessions. So Sound Transit would come and give an hour-long presentation, and council would ask a few questions. There was no discussion or debate. It was just purely informative. So calling it a study session in its old form, I don't know. Last thing, ad hoc committee meetings and not having any transparency or meeting minutes that come out of that makes me crazy. I don't think that the city's will and direction should be created by people that no one can see and you can't hear anything what they're doing, and all of a sudden there's a result. You have no idea how it got there or what the conversations are behind those closed doors. So I am vehemently opposed to any sort of ad hoc meeting that doesn't have a detailed meeting minutes or recording or a report out, and preferably public comment. So there you have me on this topic. I love this topic though. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Clerk, is there anyone else wishing to make comments?
Looking at the list of attendees, I see no further raised hands. Council Member DeMichelle.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to the first question. I don't know if we want to put the questions up again, but the The first question is provide direction on whether to proceed with written informational updates and quarterly community listening sessions. And Councilmember Martz weighed in with a yes and a yes. So Council President Walsh, you're up next.
Thank you. I will be a slightly longer yes and yes. Yes, I like the idea of using written memos for any passive informational updates. If it is an update that isn't necessarily an agenda item thing, but it's going to create discussion, I still think there are some areas that need a presentation, even if they are informational, if they're not passive. So I would put a little caveat there. And then I would also like to request, as we heard from council members last time, that if something is community oriented, I'd like to request that the information finds its way to the website so that it actually gets to the community, because this is not really the method for that. And then I'm also very supportive of quarterly listening sessions, but I'm going to throw my hat in with Connie. I think an informal barbecue and such can certainly be a town hall and a conversation with the community. I'm thumbs up behind that. Thanks.
The next person up is Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. So yes to support to proceed with written informational updates. On listening sessions, I am open to trying. I don't, however, think that the issue is that we don't have opportunities for people to talk to us. I think we do have public comment, so I think that the issue is really that engagement and that opportunity to have a discussion on a topic of interest with a community member or community members. And so I am not sure that just the changes to the listening session that are presented are going to help us meet that. I think maybe more informal, and maybe also just having an opportunity to have more discussion, especially when there's an issue in a specific neighborhood, things like that. I think this one is complicated to achieve. It's complicated to achieve the goal that council has for this, which is that more meaningful engagement. And I think we'll probably need to make some changes. So I'm open to trying the listening sessions. I think we'll probably need to make changes. And what I would ask on that is that we have a opportunity to review maybe after 2 and check in and see if the format is really meeting those goals of having meaningful engagement, and then potentially revising. That would be my ask on the listening session.
Thank you. Councilmember Ray.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Chris Ray. On informational items, I wholeheartedly support getting written informational updates, but I think we need to have the option, if there's any council member who would like a presentation, that we have a mechanism in place so that we can have presentations if somebody has a need for them, and with sufficient lead time so city staff can prepare presentations. That's my take on that one. On listening sessions, conceptually like it. I think I'm aligned with Councilmember Hunt. I think these are going to be very, very difficult to be meaningful. I'd like to see us do a couple of pilots using 2 radically different approaches so that we can do some A/B testing and see what works, and then do a little bit of plan, check, plan, do, check, act. So, plan it, we'll do it, we'll check it, and we'll adjust to it, and kind of see what works. So I'm not opposed, but I think we need to be open to the fact that we're going to have to iterate on that and go through a kind of a continuous improvement exercise.
Thank you. Councilmember Joe.
Thank you. On the first question, I think written informational updates will be important, and they should be for the passive items sent out. One question I might have for the administration and staff to consider is, can we use our SharePoint site to post those informational updates? Email's great, I'm having a little bit of trouble putting them all in the files and taking the time to put them in there. If they were in SharePoint, just under Parks and Rec and under Public Works and the different topics, as the city sees fit to organize them, the email could just say, look at the particular folder. It's an easy way to keep the information just in one place so that our email doesn't become our filing system. So just a thought there. The listening sessions, I think Councilmember Hunt is right in terms of just changing one element in the scientific method, see if it works. And I think Councilmember Ray touched on that as well. Let's change one element, try it a couple times, see if it works for the listening sessions. If we want to get more creative, if the weather gets better and COVID lifts and we can do some more creative activities outside that invite the public to come in and talk to us on an informal basis, I think that's a great idea to pursue. So those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Hall, did you want to make a comment? Deputy Council President Hall, sorry.
I'm sorry, Councilmember DiMichele, number one, can you hear me? And did you call on me?
I just wondered if you wanted to make a comment on this particular question.
Oh, okay, yeah, if you can still, I'm having very significant internet troubles right now. All of your pictures and the sound keeps going out.
Oh dear.
So just to confirm, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great, okay. I will truck along then. Yes, I would like to make some comments. I agree with proceeding with written informational updates and using the community survey to better understand where info should live for the community. Just echoing what Council President Walsh said about on the website. So clearly through the survey, we know that people go to the website and people use social media to get information from the city. So just some comments on that. For the listening sessions, I'm all in. I think it would make more sense for it to be broad and open-ended, so that way the council and the community can request specific ones if we want to, but maybe test them out more broad. I think Connie's point about having a topic and an opportunity for community members to meet with council members afterwards is a good one. So I think being flexible there is probably our best track. Also, one more thing I wanted to say too, since there have been a couple council members who've commented on, making sure that we're making meaningful connections with the community. I completely agree. I guess where my head's at is, if we're having these once a quarter, if we're even just engaging one new person every quarter, to me, that's meaningful, even just one person. So that's where my head's at. Thanks.
Great. I will say yes on the informational updates, and I agree with all the comments about making sure that those updates are shared with the public, either through social media or some other means. I agree with Connie Marsh regarding the listening sessions. 17 years at King County working on public output, and listening sessions were not successful. You maybe got a whole lot of people the first time, the second time a little bit less, and then after that maybe 3 or 4 people each time. And I think one of the things we can do is certainly provide a topic for each meeting. This is what we're going to talk about. That also helps us with the staffing, because you bring in different people for different topics so that all of staff doesn't need to be at each of those meetings. And then the public can come in and talk about any subject that they want to, but there's at least a focus so that there's, people who are interested in that particular topic make it a special point to come. I also agree with, let's try different types of meetings. And actually, I thought the idea of having a barbecue in the summer and doing it was really a pretty good suggestion. So let's try some different things to get meaningful dialogue going. So that's my input on that one. So thank you so much for putting up with this format. I know it's a little bit frustrating to just be able to comment on one question and then have to start all over again. But on the other hand, now the administration, I think, has pretty clear direction on that particular question. The next question, I expect we're going to have a lot of discussion, and that is to provide the administration with initial direction on which legislative structure option to pursue. And so let's open that up for comment. It's 8:15. We might think about taking a break after this question, but I'll ask that question when we get there. Does somebody want to start off the comments on the initial direction on which legislative structure option to pursue? And I see that Councilmember Martz would like to comment.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Yeah, I support option 2. Let me explain it a little bit. There was a question earlier about why do this. It's not because there's any problem with the commissions. There wasn't a problem with the commissions before, and there's not a problem with the commissions now. Commissions go and investigate options and get information and are a feeder so that strategic decisions can get made. And I look at the old Land and Shore Committee and how PPC and DC were feeders to Land and Shore for Land and Shore making very technical decisions. And I don't think anybody in PPC or DC would argue that, their input wasn't valued. Quite the opposite. But these were big, complicated issues. When we adopted this current mechanism a couple of years ago, I think the idea was there would be 3 tiers of review, but there would still be a detailed level of review that would occasionally occur. That never occurs now. We never review any materials the way we sometimes reviewed materials in committee in the old days. Now, did we subject too many things to that level of review? Perhaps. But I know that there are bills that are coming through that should have more detail. And I'm just not seeing those detailed reviews occurring in study sessions. There's just too much to cover when all 7 of us get together. And so we're just not providing the same level of review we used to, even on a smaller subset of bills. And I think that's the biggest reason why we should do this. We can get rid of the committee badminton that used to occur. We would have sort of a thing where bills would pop to committee and pop back up to full council and pop back to committee and pop back to full council. I saw this evening in the proposal for the second option a routing structure that would address that concern. So that particular problem that we had previously. I think there's a benefit in spreading leadership around. You basically create 4 more leadership roles on the council for the 5 members of council who are not in the council leadership, where currently the 5 of us don't have a way to provide leadership except in external committees. So I think that's beneficial for the body. It's beneficial for developing leaders that can eventually be council leadership. It's beneficial for communication back to the administration. You build centers of expertise so that you get folks that know a lot about the police or a lot about parks. The way that we don't have right now, we don't have folks that council members that focus on the parks that know more than. I think there's a benefit to having a subset of folks that have a lot of expertise in that. And then finally, more community input. I know how I ran committees, and yeah, there was give and take with members of the public in a way we can't do in a full council meeting. I recognize the OPMA restrictions are such that if I get on a committee, I can't chat about committee business with other committee members outside of committee. I don't care at all. What I want is to engage the public and engage the administration on camera on these issues, backed up with data from our commissions. Will be a more effective body. Will do a better job, and the public will be better engaged. So for all those reasons, I support option 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Martz. The next council member is Councilmember Ray.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. This is Chris Ray. Boy, I'd like to argue with anything that Councilmember Martz just said, but I was kind of writing similar kinds of notes. I think that the most interesting thing that I heard today was Councilmember Joe's comment about the alignment and synergy between commissions and committees. And I remember having a conversation with the mayor early in 2000, because it was before the pandemic started in earnest, about how do we align strategic goals, commissions, and the council. And so I like the idea of setting up committees based on strategic plan goals and aligning them with commissions. And so it's not a replacement so much as it is a engagement opportunity where it's a better opportunity for the council through its committees to engage with commissions. And I think that's really good. I also like the idea of replacing what were our monthly work sessions with a committee of the whole. And I see situations where a committee, standing committee, may decide that the topic that they are working on would benefit from getting the visibility of the entire 7, and the committee of the whole would provide a vehicle, and the smaller committee could do a referral up to the committee of the whole for further analysis. So I'm a big fan of option 2, the committee squared, or committee 2, the sequel.
Thank you, Councilmember Ray. Up next is Deputy Council President Hall.
Thank you very much, Councilmember DiMichelle. Zach Hall here. So I have comments on what legislative structure I'm interested in based on what problem we're trying to solve, but I just want to start. So tonight in at a retreat, it seems like, there's been at least a handful of council members who've indicated that committees would allow us to get deeper on the issues or connect more genuinely with the community, or align, like what was just recently, align better with boards and commissions than with study sessions, or that, it's too much to cover with all 7 of them. I'm just not tracking. I'm just not following why that is. And so I'm going to move on to my comments too, but I'm just hoping maybe we can get deeper in this conversation too about, what is it about a 3-person committee that we can have a deeper conversation than with all 7 of us, because those 3 people would still be a part of that 7-member study session. So I'm just not following, and I want to, I really do. So anyway, so my comments, I'm kind of thinking about it, taking a step back and asking, what problems we're trying to solve. So a couple, the big ones were improved public engagement. We kind of touched on that a little bit with including community listening sessions, using the community survey to better inform how we share information with the community. Staff, we'll hear later today, staff exploring emerging technologies and best practices and engaging with the community. So I feel pretty confident that we're moving in the right direction there. Inability to actively edit and refine agenda bills was another one of the major problems. Some of the solutions that we talked about were meeting more frequently or for longer, having this 3-touch policy. I can't remember how Tisha described it, but yeah, direct, review, act. So to me, that meets my needs as a council member, unsure what the consensus is or the ambiguity of direction. We've got the thumbs up, thumbs down method, admin going to directly ask the council, if it's ready to move forward, with the default being no and returning to another study session, and that would help provide clear direction. So we've also identified some other problems too, but I don't know, in my mind, they just seem very solvable outside a structure change. So if we can solve these problems we identified whilst keeping the model that we're in now, I'm just not tracking why we would consider transitioning. So I hope my colleagues can kind of comment on that a little bit and help shed some light for me. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Councilmember Hall, could I ask you if there's one of the options, like option 1, option 2, option 3, that you are leaning toward?
Yes, thank you very much. That is the sign of a good chair right there. I'm pushing back a little bit. Yeah, I guess right now, based on what problems we're trying to solve, and then going through the potential solutions that we've worked out, I think option 1 is in the best interest of the council and the community. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So Councilmember Hunt, I think is next. Hope I'm correct on that.
I think so. I think I believe you're correct. So I wanted to comment to Councilmember Hall's questions about the benefits or the our experience in the committee structure. And one thing that I will caveat all of this with is that we did move pretty quickly from switching to study sessions and then also doing everything virtually. And so study sessions, committees were not virtual, and then one additional variable has changed when we changed the study sessions, which is that we now have had all virtual meetings, which I think make some kind of dialogue and conversation more, well, at the very least different, and I think sometimes more challenging. So my impression with committees is similar to how Councilmember Martz spoke about it. We had more materials we would have more detailed materials on topics that would go to the committees. So you would be working on topics for about the same amount of time as a council member, but you would be working on fewer topics in more detail, because now that we've switched to everything moving, it's like, 2 topics would go to this committee, 2 topics would go to this committee, 2 topics would go to this committee. Now all 6 of those go to the 7 of us. And so you have to get through them faster. And the difference in the conversation is also that it's just harder sometimes to have a dialogue and deliberation with 7 people versus 3 people, and sort of really understanding why they think a certain thing on a topic and really getting into that level of depth is just harder with 7 versus a group of 3. So I have a similar take on the study sessions, and I think for certain topics it was definitely the conversations went into more detail, and we had more dialogue with one another in the committee structures. Again, part of it is probably also being virtual, but I do think 3 people just lends itself to more conversation. So I was interested in both the committee structure and the committee squared and the hybrid. I haven't heard anybody else speak to hybrid, and I think a hybrid also could be just very challenging, in addition to having it be a hybrid virtual and in person, and then also a hybrid committee and council. I think that could be pretty confusing, not only for us, but for the public, and also probably hard, just, probably unpredictable for the public and for staff. And so I think I lean towards the committees, but I also appreciate having these options, but I think I lean towards committees. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Council President Walsh.
Thank you. At this point, I'm torn between option 1, continuing our study sessions, and option 3, the hybrid model. My goal is to find a system that allows us to really delve deeply into the topics that need it, while also streamlining the items that don't, and keeping our meeting counts to a minimum unless an item really requires more attention. And so I think for the most part that aims toward option 3, but I have concerns with committees, whether that's option 2 or option 3. I'm really not swayed by the specialization or expertise argument for committees. I think whether we have 7 or 3 members at the table, the 3 with the heavy interest are there and are included in the conversation. I think the comments about virtual meetings kind of overlapping with this transition is important to kind of consider whether we really truly were able to effectively work as a 7-member body, delving deeply into something which would be easier in person. I think if we really focus on changing our process to a 3-touch policy, where we default to holding an item until it's ready, we should be able to achieve the deep work that's been missing right now. And we can also change how we run our study sessions so that they're less formal and more engaging with the community. And we can do all of that without having just a 3-member committee that has the limited opinions until it comes back at the end. So I think those are my concerns with a committee idea that might be handled by some changes that we're looking with study session. I think my other concern with committees is the delay in getting our work done when the committees only meet monthly. And then if they're meeting on something 2 or 3 times, or even just 1 or 2 times, and then have to refer it back to our regular meetings, that's a lot longer than if we took an item in on a study session and did it 1 week and then the next week, and then, you know, it comes out. So I think that was one of the reasons that the study session in the first place was appealing to me. And I think we need to make sure we're keeping that portion in mind as well. So put me down as leaning toward both 1 and 3. I still have concerns and questions. Thanks.
I was just going to ask for clarification on which one were you leaning toward, because I heard both. So thank you for the clarification that you're leaning toward both. Okay. Councilmember Joe.
Thank you. I'm just smiling because by the time the administration gets done kind of sorting out all our opinions, we'll have a concurrence, a majority. We're kind of like the Supreme Court of the United States a little bit. So I don't envy the administration for having to sort through that. Let me just take a step back for a moment. As many of you know, I'm in the government affairs, public relations area in my professional life. And many of my colleagues have commented that the pandemic has really caused difficulty with having what we call the 5-minute conversation in the hallway that Councilmember Hall is probably very familiar with. That 3-minute conversation you can have with the legislator as they're going from one committee meeting to the floor or what have you. I'm more in favor of option number 2 because it gives us more informal contacts with the public. When I was on council, I would often show up to my committee meeting early, and there would be some public members that were there, and we would just start talking about anything that was related to the city that was on their mind, and then it might have drifted to the topic for the committee meeting itself. But that relationship building that occurred with the members that were interested in coming and commenting and coming to the committee meetings, I count those people as some of the closest people that I still count as friends in the city now, because we had those conversations, we had a shared interest. And so by having more informal meetings with committee meetings, I think it gives us an opportunity to have those 5-minute conversations in the hallway, or staying a little bit after a committee meeting and talking about issues that might or might not be related to the business of the city, but give a connection to the community at large with the businesses going on with the city. Also, I think that again, it's important to align the business of our boards and commissions with our committees as we go forward, so that we're having the business of the city go forward in kind of a planned out form, so to speak. Also, there was some discussion about the boards and commissions providing leadership and information, but also if you look at the members on the council right now, many of us were on the PPC or the Development Commission or other boards and commissions along the way. It's the incubator, so to speak, for our future leaders. And we want those people to be informed about, environmental issues or planning issues. But we also want to make sure that they're connected and informed about the larger structure of the council, so they know what they're getting into when they decide to throw their hat into the ring and run for office. And by having that connection with the council, seeing the real work that we do, it helps build future leaders both in competency and future leaders that know what to expect and what is expected of them should they run for office in the future. So I'm leaning toward option number 2. It's the one with more meetings. And I think that's important that we have more contact with the public on a formal and informal basis as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Joe. Councilmember Martz would like to make additional comments. I have comments. Councilmember Martz, do you want to go before me or after me?
Well, I leave it up to you. I had intended to wait till everyone had a chance to speak, and then I was going to go to round 2. But however it's your meeting.
Oh, it's your meeting. You're, yeah. I'll go ahead, but I don't want to preempt your comments if you're feeling strongly about it. No, okay. So, no surprise, I'm leaning towards option number 1, and um, I like the study session with adjustments. I like the suggested adjustments that have been suggested by the administration with ad hoc committees with definite end dates and clear goals. I think the ad hoc approach provides us with more flexibility to address issues as they emerge. Uh, and again, I have not experienced the standing committees, and I'm also realizing that for almost my entire time on the council, I've been on virtual meetings as well, and so those comments were well taken. This is not the usual way that we're going to conduct business, hopefully into the future. So the drawbacks to me for the standing committee is one of the issues that I've been really thinking about is looking at those proposed meeting schedules and seeing how much of an increase in meetings it brings about was a little bit startling to me. And again, I raised the issue of equity and who are we going to eliminate when we have that kind of heavy meeting schedule. It's already difficult for parents of young children or even teenagers to participate. Those people who have jobs and have to commute to them or don't have flexible work schedules, self-employed people and so forth. It's really difficult to think about running for council. And when you look at the way that the committee structure increases or doubles the amount of meetings that we're planning to have, I think that's a little worrisome to me in regards to going into the future. I am quite willing to participate in that schedule if that's the will of the council, and I don't personally have any problem with it. I just am thinking about as we look to who we're going to recruit for future council members, is this meeting schedule going to be such a barrier to a variety of voices that we might want to include on the council? I also worry when I looked at the list of the committees, it looked real right away as though there were truly unequal work assignments, and some committees were going to be carrying a heavy, heavy load, and others might not meet even quarterly to do their business. And so I think that's something that really needs to be worked out. If we have 4 standing committees, I think we've got to be thinking about equal workloads for each of those committees. So again, I know it's no surprise I'm supporting option number 1, admitting that it's the only form of meetings that I've really participated in. And things will change when we go from virtual to in-person. I also acknowledge that. So those are my comments. Now I'll go back to Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. A couple of points related to this. I want to say this, and I don't mean to sound grumpy, but I will point out that the people who have the most experience with standing committees are the people who want to see us go back to standing committees.
Yeah.
So, in terms of how 3 people can cover a topic better than 7, Go do an experiment. Go out to lunch with 2 of your friends, try to parse the check and figure out what everybody's contribution is. Now do that with 7 people, and you'll see you've got an inherent efficiency associated with smaller numbers of people. If you trust a subset of your council members to do the deep dive and bring back at a higher level, um, that's why that system works. In terms of the questions about how much work we have and the work that would be involved in going back to standing committees, I submit that all we're going to do if we go with option 1 is we're going to trade homework for public work. We're going to trade an assumption that people are going to go off and read packets for the work of having staff present, which is how it used to work in standing committees, where the staff would walk us through material in public, with public comment. Instead, it's going to be, there's still a bunch of work. It's just you're going to sit reading the packet at home without public input. So I'm not convinced that option 1 is less work than option 2. In terms of, I just look back at 2 examples, Title 18 and the comp plan. I think about what that would have looked like this last year had we had standing committees. We would have taken Title 18, we would have divvied it out into all the standing committees. All the conversation about Title 18 would have occurred on camera. Likewise, we would have come into the comp plan the way we used to do it, which is divvying the comp plan out into committees. The committees would have done deep dives on all the comp elements. And then we would have come back together with the inputs from the committees. So both Title 18 and the comp plan, it's obvious to me, would have been a better, more transparent public policy if we had had standing committees than if we go with option 1 and try to band-aid the substantial lack of detailed review and substantial transparency issues associated with option 1 that are going to become more apparent as we lift out of COVID. And finally, I would say if we stick with option 1, I believe we need to do a salary commission. The last time we did a salary commission, it was based on having standing committees. And if in fact we think option 1 has less work associated with it than options 2, then it probably behooves us as a body to relook at the effort estimates that we put for the work associated with our jobs and the compensation, and perhaps we should go with a smaller salary compensation if in fact we're doing less work than we did the last time we did a salary commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Martz. Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. One additional comment, which is on the meeting schedule. I do think we should evaluate through the lens of who can do this work, and are we making this prohibitively difficult for people that have small children, like you mentioned, or people in all walks of life, really. I think we should consider that. But I also think that the meeting schedule for option 1 as presented here doesn't show all of the times when we've had ad hoc meetings, which I have served on some of those ad hoc groups. And those meetings have sometimes been during the day, which could be hard for folks. And the need for those ad hocs, I think, is not going to go away and is in fact acknowledged as part of the plan for option 1. So I just wanted to point that out. It has the meetings of the group, but it doesn't point out all of the ad hoc meetings, which I think would continue.
Councilmember Joe.
Thank you. I would just point out with option number 2, each council member will only be on 2 committees. So they'd be committed to 2 of the green boxes and not all 4 of them. So while it does present a burden in terms of our additional work, members of the public that would want to come and talk to a board or commission, a committee on a particular topic might only need to go to 1 of those committee meetings a month. They wouldn't need to go to all 4 of them to be involved. And we as council members would only be committed to 2 of those committee meetings. So the schedule is not as lined up as 2 meetings every week for each council member. So I've just put that out there for consideration. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments on this particular question? All right. So I'm going to summarize, and I've been taking extensive notes, and I'm sure Tisha has been taking extensive notes, but um, basically we have 4 council members who support option 2. We have 3 council members who support option 1, and one of those council members is also interested in option 3. So let me ask the administration if they have what they need out of this discussion. City Administrator Bob Quitz.
I'm sorry. I think we do. I'm concerned about what the committees would consider. I mean, I think under the plan that we're proposing, we would be sending to committees only those items that would be on regular business, as we basically do now with study sessions. So I guess I would want to confirm that as we go forward. We are not, again, we would not be sending presentations to committees. I don't believe it's the administration's thought that committees would be creating their own items of business and asking staff to do things separate from that. But if that is not correct, we would need to know, because I think we also need to then assess how much additional work is going to be required. If we're merely taking those items that would otherwise have gone to a study session, sending them to the appropriate subject matter committee, that I think is pretty clear. If there's an expectation that there's additional presentations that the council would not receive, or additional items that the committees could ask for separate than the full council, then that's an increase in work, and would just like some clarification before we move forward of what the council's expectation is.
Councilor Martz has a comment.
Sure. Two parts to directly address the question from the city administrator. I don't envision the committee getting supplemental materials, although I think during COVID, I think the general level of prepared materials for the full council has been lighter than it was in pre-COVID era. But I think it's just more that the committee cracks open the language of the ABs. You know, you bring up the AB and you say, do people have problems in section 2, section 3, section 4, section 5, and in a way. So I don't see additional staff presentation material. The second piece, though, that I want to mention is in terms of the workload on these. As I look at it, I do think that land use and environment would actually have a heavier lift than the other 3. In my experience, land use by itself, if you're going to divvy it up into quarters, land use should just be its own, because it's at least a quarter of the work by itself. And then after that, parks and police are two of the most active subject matter areas. In the old days, when we had 3 committees, basically land and shore was by far the busiest committee, and then it was services and safety, which was parks and police and fire, and then it was the third one. So I see in this, if we go forward with option 2, I think there may need to be some revision here, because I really do think that land use and environment committee would be far more busy than the other 3. Thank you.
Councilmember Joe.
Thank you. First of all, with the heavier load committees, the way it's structured, there'll be 2 council members that would only serve on 1 committee. So perhaps those 2 members would be the members that we'd want to have serve on heavier committees. And then you can kind of divvy out the workload in terms of, if you have 2 committees, you have one on the lightest committee, let's say that's the services committee, and then another one on the more heavy committee, just kind of even things out. I think that can be kind of looked at by the leadership to on the committee assignments as you go forward. The other comment that I would have is that I think that from the administration's question, yes, we're only looking at the agenda bills that would go to a study session, with one caveat that I think that the committees should be committed to having a meeting with the boards and commissions that they are in the vertical with, you know, so that the boards and commissions at least once a year are able to meet with the committee, talk about the issues of concern. That would be the only other item that I think would be on there. That would be the chair's responsibility to coordinate with the particular staff member. It wouldn't be an extra legislative item or anything like that, but it would be more of a public relations and relationship building element that would be incorporated in the committee structure.
All right, any other comments or direction? We're going to bring this back again one more time in March, so. All right, Councilmember Ray.
I'm going to use the evil word, but I do think if we do decide to make a change, and I don't know if we are, there are a lot of details to be hashed out about a change, and we did this when we made the last change, and so there is going to be a need, I believe, for a working group, an ad hoc committee, call it what you will, to hammer out the details, and that can address the scheduling issues, that can address the issues around what are the committee topics that can address Councilmember Joe's issue around integration with commissions. I think that the current topic is really not so much the details as it is the direction, because if we change direction, we've got a lot of work to do to hammer the details out. Thanks.
Great. And Council President Walsh.
Thank you. Are we gonna ask the two other questions, the identify any further information needed and identify outstanding items to further discuss?
That is my plan. However, I was going to stop and take a temperature check here in just a second. I'm just writing down some notes on Councilmember Ray's comments. Any other comments to the second question? All right, we have two more questions on this topic. I'm wondering if we're ready. We've been here for over almost 2.5 hours. Do we want to take a short break and then come back? Or do we want to plow through? Or I see some people want to break and some people want to plow through. Should we have a thumbs up and thumbs down? Councilmember Hunt.
I think a break.
A break. All right. All right. Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll be back at 8:56 and we'll continue at that point. Thanks. clarify any further information needed. So are there people who would like to, council members who would like to make comments on the third question? Deputy Council President Hall?
Thank you very much, Zach Hall here. A couple of other considerations just based on our discussions tonight. And that is, what are the ways, are there ways that we can informalize study sessions and create the kind of deep dialogue between council members, but also community that, council members here have mentioned, but also people in public comment have mentioned, kind of a missing dialogue between the community and council members. So yeah, what are the ways that we can informalize study sessions? And then also, I would be interested to know how often other councils are meeting. When you add up council meetings, committee meetings, or study sessions, or ad hocs in the region, I think that would be interesting to look at. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Hall. Councilmember Walsh. Council President Walsh, excuse me.
I can just go by Lindsay, but thanks, Councilmember DiMichele. So I've got a few things. So kind of looking at our annual work plan, I'd like to see in each of these options a list of items that might be referred to committees versus handled by study sessions. So I'm trying to get a sense how often the committees would really get used. I think in some cases, as committees were created previously, they would have an item on the agenda every month or a meeting on the agenda every month, but just not meet. And so, and then if stuff is getting handled by committees, what kind of workload does that leave for any study sessions or committee of the whole? So just trying to get a sense of what each of those options would be. And then I also want to know what the timeline is for a sample item at the mid and high policy level. What are each of the touch points and the time required to get something to a committee, have 2 touches at a committee, and then back to the regular council? How does that compare to a study session model and how long it takes something to go through? And then potentially some other options for committee subject areas that might provide more equal workloads, if there are any other options that the administration has considered. And then we've talked a few times about a 3-touch policy and kind of the process of something starting out as an informational item, having a policy conversation, and then an agenda bill at some point. I'd like to understand more about what that is proposed and how it differs from what the administration thinks we're doing now. And for each of these examples, when the draft agenda bill would be brought up versus the ID. I think in one of the examples in the presentation, the agenda bill draft wasn't proposed until something came to the regular meeting. And I think that's really late, but in other situations, everything starts with an agenda bill. So I want to know what that set of proposed is for each of the options. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Hunt.
So for additional information, one thing I would like is more on the listening sessions. To go back to that point, just what the administration thinks some formats could be, and I think we had a lot of good conversation on that, but we didn't have very much information from in the packet or from the administration on what the ideas would be. So I think having some ideas about what those look like, maybe like an agenda, a demonstration agenda, something like that would be helpful, that we could pick up that conversation.
All right, any further comments on question number 3 or item number 3? All right, if it's all right, we'll move on to the last question. And the last item was identify outstanding items to further discuss and provide feedback on at the March 1st, 2022 study session. Any additional comments on anything related to this topic? Going once? I'm going very slowly, going twice. Deputy Council President Hall.
Thank you, Zach Hall here. Not necessarily related to the fourth item because I think the third and the fourth are pretty similar. But I did just want to acknowledge, I think Councilmember Martz pointed out something really useful in that it was that, people who have the most experience with committees are interested in the committee structure, and people who haven't really been exposed to the committee structure aren't. So I just wanted to say on camera that I'm going to own my bias. That's really well pointed out, Councilmember Martz. I hadn't thought of that. So as we continue in this discussion, I think we all have to consider how we're showing up to this. And anyways, I just wanted to say that. Thank you for pointing that out.
Well put, well put. Council President Walsh.
Thank you. And I'll add to that, toward that idea, I don't know if anybody has actually effectively experienced a study session model because so much of it has been virtual.
Right.
That being said, for the outstanding items, I think as Deputy Council President Hall said, a lot of it has to do with the further information and discussing that. But I think other parts is just firming up, what does it look like to make that change? What's the timeline proposed by the administration, and what does the administration need from council as far as potentially an ad hoc in order to get there? And then some of the things for a potential ad hoc to talk about is how do we handle meeting shifts that are required by holidays? How does that work if we have more meetings? Is it possible to get our schedule down to just 2 nights a week so that we're not having, one committee meet on a Wednesday and another committee meet on a Thursday, which is really difficult with kids and their weekly schedules. And then also potentially how do we handle committee chairs and then the relationship of the committee to the boards and the commissions. So I'm not sure so much of that is conversation for March 1st, but potentially topics for an ad hoc on the idea. Thanks.
Great. I see the city administrator has popped in here. So would you like to speak first?
If I may, Councilmember DiMichele, I just would like to follow up on the Council President's comments about what's expected of us on March 1st, because in the last 10 minutes, I think the Council has added quite a lot of work for the additional items. So we will do our best. I think it's important to keep this on track to answer as much of it as we can. But it seems as if the expectation is that the next step would be an ad hoc to finalize this, if we can get general agreement on March 1st of a general approach. So Councilmember DiMichele, I'm just looking for some direction, general direction from the council. If that's what's expected, we will not come with all the various permutations answered. We'll address the questions that have just been raised, firm up what committees would look like, what the subject topics would be. Well, I think we also want to do a little bit of research over the last 2 years, because I think certainly the experience of the last 2 years as to what's been on your regular business agenda may be different than what it was in the previous years. It has not been as heavy on land use, save the Title 18 project. And so we'll do all that. But I just want to make sure the understanding is then that after March 1st, if there's general concurrence of a direction, that there would be an ad hoc, and that ad hoc would then sort out the details and then come back to the council either later in March or the first part of April.
All right, I want Councilmember Joe to get his comments in, and then we'll come back and see, maybe we'll do a thumbs up, thumbs down on the ad hoc question. Councilmember Joe?
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. The request I would have is the cost for options 2 and 3 had a total estimate of about $23,000. I'd like to see if the administration, based on our conversation, sees that number going up or down based on the things that we've asked for, the refinements we've asked for. I think that would be helpful for the conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So I'm hoping I'm framing this question correctly. The city administrator is asking us if our expectation is that there will be an ad hoc committee put together to help with the transition to the new format, whatever that may turn out to be at the end of our discussion in March. Could we just have a thumbs up or thumb down if your expectation is that it is that we are going to have an ad hoc to help with the transition? That's unanimous. Good. And then Deputy Council President Hall.
Thank you. Yeah, just wanted to clarify. So I do think an ad hoc would be a good idea to keep some of this work from falling solely on the administration, but would we be able to record or provide public comment or stream live this ad hoc meeting? Since I know that's been part of our conversation and one of the options anyways. So do we want to test it out? More a question for the council or Wally. I'll leave it open.
I don't know if you want to respond to that, City Administrator Bob Quitz, or if that's a question that we can address in March.
Councilmember DiMichele, members of the council, I think that's something you can address in March. Certainly, you know, we're going to be coming back together. Hopefully, we could certainly have the ad hoc meet on Teams, have the community be able to get on that or WebEx. So I don't think it's a big deal. I think it's really a policy question, but technologically, we can figure it out.
Great. All right. Any further comments on the last item for this agenda item? Have we thoroughly vetted this? All right. Thank you to everybody and everybody's patience. And again, thanks for being
Councilmember
patient.
DiMichele.
Yes.
There's a couple of comments in the chat box from.
Oh, sorry about that. And I've lost track of. I believe Councilmember Hunt is next. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And then
Okay.
Council President Walsh after me. And I just wanted to add, I previously served on the committee, which was the Rules Committee. So we looked at the council rules that was mentioned earlier. Last time we did a big change in procedure. And I think the question of whether we stream live, I think that's great if technology allows. I think it also depends a little bit, the utility of that depends a little bit on the kind of work that's being done. I think last time when we did the rules committee, it was really like making sure that the wording in the rules was clear and clearly reflected the conversations we had already had on council about what we wanted to change in the rules. So I think it probably depends a little bit on how important it is to record it once we have the conversation about what exactly that ad hoc will do.
Thank you very much. And Council President Walsh.
Thank you. So I heard City Administrator Bob Quitz say, hey, you know, you guys asked for a lot of additional information in the last 10 minutes, and I'm just not sure that necessarily makes sense for March 1st timeline. I'm wondering if I can ask my fellow council members, one of my major concerns with a committee structure is the timeline that it takes policy to get through with a once a month meeting of the committees. And so one of the things I've asked for is what that timeline looks like for mid and high policy level items. And so I know I can obviously count the number of council members that are interested in committees. I'm wondering whether that information at all is necessary for somebody to make their decision on that standpoint, and whether I need to strongly request that information before the March 1st, or whether I'm the only one with that as a major concern. And I will primarily ask the 4 members that were strongly interested in committees.
Councilmember Hunt.
We previously did have a system of committee badminton, I think it was referred to by Councilmember Martz, where things would pop from committee up to the full council and then sometimes be referred back, and that did take time. So I think that has been that was a known issue with the previous way we held committees. And so it would be great, I think, to see a structure, a way of doing work that didn't take those extra steps, because that was an inefficiency, and I see no need for doing things that way. So from that perspective, I think it would be great to see a timeline of committees, and hopefully of how work would go through committees, and hopefully it would alleviate some of your concern, because I think there are ways to not have it be take as long as it did previously.
Councilmember Ray.
Thanks, Councilmember DiMichele. I concur with Councilmember Hunt that there was some bad council hygiene that led to a lot of delay, and we also had the fact that we didn't start until an AB was completely written, and then we had to bring it to council, and we had to do a referral. There was a lot of overhead associated with it, and though the committee would only meet once a month, right now with study sessions, if we have a study session that's topicked on environment, that happens here. And then 2 weeks later, we have one that's focused on human services, and that happens 2 weeks later. So we can run things in parallel instead of in series. And so you can actually move things along potentially faster in a committee structure than in a study session. So I think if we structure it right, we can, I believe we can run them, we can get things done faster because we'll run issues in parallel instead of in series.
Council President Walsh, did you get the information you need?
Yep. Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, so it sounds like you would like to continue with the administration bringing back information about the timeline.
Well, I think I'm interested. I'm not sure I'm hearing that from my fellow council members, so I'll defer and talk to the administration offline.
Okay, thanks. Any other discussion of this agenda item? All right, thanks to everybody. We're going to go to item number 3, and that's a discussion of our public engagement, potentially new ways of doing public engagement. It's going to be presented by Autumn Monahan, Director of Administrative Services.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele.
There you are. Go ahead.
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Hi, my name is Autumn Monahan. I'm the Administrative Services Director. Tonight, the purpose is to gather some initial feedback from the City Council on current engagement efforts and our work plan for 2022. Back in 2017, the City Council adopted our Public Engagement Toolkit. It recognized that engagement is never a one-size-fits-all, and engagement can take so many forms. So this document really serves as a launching point as we help managers create engagement plans for their projects or initiatives. This toolkit walks project managers through 5 steps of engagement. The first is assessing readiness to engage. The next is determining the right level of engagement, and then identifying your stakeholders, selecting the right engagement tools, and finally, how to report and evaluate on your work, including making sure that you have updates on agenda bills around your engagement efforts. We're looking to update this toolkit in 2022. Our goal is to include reviewing this document more with an equity lens and also updating our current tools that we have in our toolkit around engagement. And after some discussion around online engagement tools that came up during a recent City Council retreat, we thought this was a great time to start collecting Council's feedback. So currently we have a hub of information for larger engagement efforts on the city's website under the major projects pages. Here's just one example of a project. It includes images, sometimes video if we've produced one, an overview, a timeline, oftentimes contact information, resources on how you can subscribe to get further updates on that topic, links to community meetings or surveys that have either happened or that are coming up, and then any other summaries of our engagement efforts. Starting last year, we started experimenting with a new survey tool called Typeform. And so far it's been pretty successful. We've had 8 surveys with almost 3,000 responses. The largest was our wayfinding project that had 1,300 responses. That survey was very visually based, and it was wonderful to use a new tool in Typeform in that we could show images in large format. People could react looking at the visuals versus oftentimes taking something that's heavy in text. So we saw a ton of engagement around that project. With the surveys, we can integrate these on our current website and embed them so it's part of our website. They're also mobile friendly and have a really clean, easy to use interface and even offer skip logic. So far we've been happy experimenting with that tool. And here's just an example of what the kind of the first screen was when you entered our wayfinding survey and the visuals around that. We've also experimented with a tool called Mentimeter. This is not useful for all community meetings, but I think it's a good one to have in our toolbox. As we transitioned to online engagement during the pandemic, we tried using this online survey tool during meetings for real-time engagement. So participants could vote on options via their phone or their computers if they opened up a separate browser tab, and then people could see the results in real time as people were voting. And so we've used this on a few occasions, and it's worked well in certain situations. So there are some engagement ideas listed in the work plan for 2022 for communications. One is outreach on the city's decision-making process. So using flowcharts, visuals, and video to explain how legislation works and how it flows through a council process. As a first step, I would like to really research what other agencies have done and see if there's some creative ways to do that and simplify that communication around what the workflow looks like. Also, starting to promote more items on the City Council's agenda in the Issaquah Insider. That's our weekly newsletter that comes out on Fridays. As you have already discussed a bit tonight, taking City Council meetings on the road to neighborhoods. And right before the pandemic, actually, we were working with anthology apartments to see if there was a way we could bring a council meeting to their meeting space and either before or after have a meet and greet with council. And so that's something that has been something we've wanted to do, and it's still on our wish list as the pandemic hopefully lifts. And then researching online engagement tools. So I'm here tonight just to show you a few brief, quick options just to really jumpstart that discussion. So the first of these tools is called Bang the Table, which many local cities are currently using, including City of Bellevue, which is what you're looking at here. This offers a lot of the same elements that our current major projects pages do. So you'll see there's pictures, title, overview, contact information, a timeline, documents, all of that kind of repository of information, along with a link for a survey on this project. It's important to note that if we were to use one of these tools, this would not be a part of our city's website. It would be separate. It's not something we can easily embed. So we'd have to work through how those two integrate to minimize any confusion if people are going to our website and then we've got a separate engagement tool. But these do offer some features. One is allowing for public comments to be posted or ideas to be posted, and then for others to like those ideas. Very similar to social media, where you can hit a like button or a heart button to show your support for an idea. It also enables engagement using maps, so you can drop a pin and include some comments around certain engagements. So it's another way of kind of surveying people using maps. We also have access to something called ArcGIS with our GIS platform, which the city of Shoreline actually has just started to experiment with, and you'll see their engagement here on their stormwater master plan. This also provides a hub for posting information on a project. You can embed surveys on this, and you can also use similar mapping tools like Bang the Table. And we have access to some of this platform already, and so we experimented with this back in 2020, if you remember, during the holiday season, and asked folks to take a picture of their holiday lights and post their address so that we would have a community holiday lights map. And you see here too, we integrated forms on this so you could submit your information to the map. We integrated a holiday video we'd also included. So we've been trying and experimenting with this tool a little bit, but haven't delved too far into it quite yet. And a third tool is called public input. This is used at times by King County. Again, very much a hub of information around major projects. Has the ability to submit comments, sometimes with a mapping feature as well, and then the ability to agree with other people's comments. So very similar in kind of the line of Bang the Table. So that was just my brief overview of kind of a few tools that are out there. We wanted to just some options to just get the discussion going. So we're just kind of looking for ideas of what we should be researching further as we dive into 2022. And so, are you interested in the idea of hosting more community discussions online outside of social media on our own engagement platform? Do you like the idea of voting or liking other people's comments or suggestions? Do you like the idea of requiring registration and contact information? Sometimes that's good in that we can connect with people on an ongoing basis, but it also can be a barrier for engagement or to ask people to provide their contact information. I've shown a few tools tonight that include mapping, and if that's something of interest, we can be researching that more. And then also, how important is it to integrate with our current website? And again, ensuring that we have ways that we have to integrate those two together would be really important moving forward. So that's all I have, and I'm here to answer any questions.
Deputy Council President Hall.
Thank you very much, Zach Hall here, and thank you very much, Director Monahan now, I suppose. One question that I have on community discussions, and I think it's a great idea, but I was wondering if you could speak to trolls and how organizations control and plan for that, or if you need to take that as an action item to kind of look into, that's fine too. But any insight you might have into that, I would greatly appreciate it.
Sure. If we were to implement a new engagement tool, I would recommend that we follow the same policy as our social media policy. And that is pretty broad as far as the ability to comment on whatever you have any comment you like. It's just make sure that you don't use swear words or that you're not threatening others. There's some key items we look for that would trigger us in ever hiding a comment or not allowing a comment. Some of these tools have the option to review comments before they actually are public, but I would lean toward the just letting it open, similar to social media, of people commenting how they what they would like to say.
Councilmember Joe.
Thank you. Director Monahan, oftentimes when we're doing surveys or kind of polling the community, we often want to know whether they live in the city or whether they live in King County or elsewhere. And then, their tie or their connection to the community, whether they have a business or what have you. How do we do that in your tools without necessarily discouraging people that might live just 50 yards outside of town? We still want their comments, we still want their input. Could you give us a little bit of information about that?
Sure, and we do often, we have a survey up right now to provide feedback as we're recruiting for our next police chief, and are asking, are you a resident or do you live and work in Issaquah, and if so, what neighborhood? So we can better understand who is responding to the survey. Those demographic questions are usually at the end of the survey and are not required. So again, I don't want to have a barrier for folks to provide feedback. And then also what's key is, yes, we have the survey, but how are we telling people about the survey? And oftentimes that's through our e-news, that's through our social media accounts, it's through our website, and those don't see boundaries as far as who lives in the city, who doesn't, or who works here and who doesn't.
Yeah, and if I could ask a follow-up, in terms of reaching an audience that is diverse and really reflects our community, oftentimes, without categorizing people, let's say people over 65 or 70 may not have computer savvy skills or access to high-speed internet. How do we reach those people? How do we get the equity picture so that we're getting the right cross section, so to speak, of our community?
Yeah, and I think that's one area I want to update on our engagement toolkit. So part of that includes ideas as we sit down with project managers and say, all right, here's your project. What kind of engagement plan are you putting together for this? Is who are you trying to reach and how are you going to do that? And we have some typical items that we always use, right, for general city communications. But if you're really wanting to reach those who are 70 and up, what are some, community liaisons or people that we know that can help us in getting the word out? Are we working with the senior center or with other nonprofits that could help us in also reaching certain demographics? And so we need to refresh that toolkit and that list of options for how we can reach just a diversity, diverse amount of our community members. And so that's why I'd like to look at the toolkit a bit more with an equity lens and with both the equity board and our internal equity team.
Do we have any further questions? I have a couple, and I'm not seeing any others. One of them is I am a hands-on person when it comes to high tech, and so I'm wondering if there would be an opportunity to demo some of these products so that we could actually experience using them.
Yes, I can definitely send out links to what I've shown tonight. And I did want to walk you through all of the web pages tonight, but I can definitely send you the links so that you can feel that experience as well.
Yeah, I think that would be great for if we were able to do that.
Sure.
And then a question on the community engagement, not plan, but what's the word that I'm trying to think of? The toolkit that you have. Um, that's an internal document, if I'm not, yeah. And I'm just wondering, would it be a stronger document if that were a community engagement policy? Does it need to be lifted to a higher level? Do most employees feel that they are really encouraged to use that toolkit? Or does it need to have a stronger support from the council?
Sure. And the toolkit is public. It is on our website. And so it is accessible to anyone. And actually, we've had a lot of other organizations ask us for a copy of it as they're working through kind of what their engagement plans are. What's important and what makes this successful is training of staff. So we have this toolkit, and first it needs to be updated. It's been several years. So once we have that update, what's key for its success is training with employees. And oftentimes, it lives with communications because oftentimes that's one of the first places that project managers come and say, all right, I'm ready to share about my project, or I'm ready to engage. And this is a really helpful way for us to sit down in a meeting and say, all right, let's work through this together, and come up with a plan. And like I had mentioned before, it's not a one size fits all when it comes to projects or initiatives. And so oftentimes we need to have that flexibility and that creativity, even halfway through a project, when we realize, what we need now? We actually need a community meeting around this topic, or we need to really pivot and do something different. And so that was the idea behind having calling it a toolkit, is that we have some flexibility in it, but also provide some options and some structure around a starting place.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
If there are no more questions, I'm going to ask the city clerk if there is anyone wanting to make public comment on this agenda item.
Yes, Councilmember DeMichelle. Connie Marsh would like to comment. Ms. Marsh, I'm making you a panelist. You should now see the option to unmute and turn on your video.
And Anna, maybe take down the PowerPoint. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, oh, here I am again, different wall. Connie Marsh again. And again, from the community lens, the toolkit, if you know to call it a toolkit and care to search the website, you can eventually find the toolkit. And then it doesn't do you much good because all it is a list of options. So you don't really know what could or would or might be chosen. So one of the things that is a role of several of us in the community is we get these phone calls. They're saying, we don't understand what happens next. And there are some things that are actually standard, and you can say, well, this is what you can expect. This is how you input. This is what you do. But when it comes to these toolkit decisions and flexibilities, it's very hard. First, I'm going to say, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. We can hear
Yes,
you, Connie.
okay, good. It's very hard for the community to even know what's going on. So while you all in the city might think it's great to be flexible, it often leaves us scratching our heads and saying, why is this happening now? What is happening now? And why is this different than the last project that we did? And all of a sudden, it's a whole different process. And I don't think that is successful. So I think when you look at this, you need to create systems that are standardized for certain types of projects, and then people will be able to follow. Now, the tools that you use to implement those timelines or systems, those could flex to some extent. Also, conspicuously lacking in feedback loop. So you might have these toolkits where people go out, but you do not have any feedback loops in this system that work at all. Again, it's being dropped into the pool of silence for 8 to 10 months, and then something might come up. But in the meantime, the thing that the community had to spend hours working on is just like gone and out of sight. So the last and probably most important comment is the framing of the information that goes or is to be used in any of these public toolkit issues needs to be honest and unbiased and actually allow the community the conversations that they want to have. It can't be that the city has made a decision and they are going to basically apply their preconceived decision upon the community and call it community engagement. And so while this is a topic about the media that you might use, what we are really missing is education in how to appropriately frame issues for the community, and to ensure that they're getting their input in early on in the process. So I think this is a conversation that needs to be taken up a level so that the quality of your presentations to the community are vastly improved. Because right now it's more like we feel more like we're being herded most of the time into a preconceived end, and that often makes people grumpy. So there's my input on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Connie. Chief Grabowski, is there any further people wishing to make comments?
No, there are not. Councilmember DeMichelle.
Thank you so much. So we will go to comments from the council, and is there anybody who would like to comment? Council President Walsh.
Thank you. And don't mind the cat on my lap right now, but you know, he wants to be a part of the conversation. So I think we need to probably take a step back and ask what problem we're trying to solve before we get down into tools. I think it's important to get a sense whether we're trying to get people to engage at meetings or get survey responses or to do project or map-based information sharing. And so getting a sense both of what the community feels is important to have ways and tools of engagement, as well as the administration and the council's sense of, well, what areas are missing in public engagement and that we feel could use a tool. So kind of thinking about it backward as far as what's our need before what are the tools that are available. And then I'd also request that before we start researching tools, we just take a little bit of time and call our neighboring cities and say, hey, communications director, which tools have you found that have been the most successful? What gave you the best information? Which ones gave you the most community engagement? And so I would also use that as a set of real world information before we start looking at possible tools. So two different ways of looking at it. What have other people used that's been successful, and what are our needs, goals, and strategy so that we know what we should be looking for?
Deputy Council President Hall.
Thank you very much. Issaquah again. Councilmember DiMichele, can you confirm again that you can hear me already?
I can hear
HFN
you.
is acting up tonight.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, I have some comments, although I agree with Council President Walsh about trying to define, the problem we're trying to solve. I do think that there are some issues in good government that transcend the question of what problem we're trying to solve, though. And I think those are engagement and equity, or at least the two that have come in contact with us sometimes. I think in order to be, a good government, you're always looking to improve systemically in those two areas. But by asking the question, what problem we're trying to solve, we can more genuinely address the ways that the community would like to be involved in policymaking. So I think that's a good point. So anyways, on to my comments. I want to say, I think the more that we can connect with our community through social media and through polls, the better. I've been super impressed with how the city applies multimeter. I think it's that to community meetings. I notice we use it sometimes at all city meetings too, to take polls of city employees as well. We also talk a lot about whether or not council presentations are the best forum for sharing information out with the community. Along the topic of social media, I'd love to see continued progress in the scope of our content on social media. Maybe video updates about city programs are better suited for some people, and trying to understand what other governments and what other agencies are doing in that space would be helpful. There are community members who want to be super involved with public policy development, and we definitely want to encourage that. But then there are also people who just want to know what's going on. And sometimes the best way to do that is to meet them in a forum where they are actively engaged already, like social media. I just wanted to say I love that you're committed to engaging with other agencies about the tools they use. Surveying people using maps, I think, is an excellent idea. At the risk of putting the cart before the horse a little bit here, I'll try and find the article and share it out, but there was an article I read recently about a study pretty similar that the city of Amsterdam did, just like this, and it costs a bit more. That they had a little button that they handed out to all the bikers in the city, which, as you can imagine, is probably a lot. That's the biking capital of the world. And whenever they hit a sidewalk crack, rounded a turn that was unsafe, anything like that, they'd click the button and it would automatically populate a map that, you know, transportation engineers would then use to make improvements to the grid. So I think this idea of using the map is an excellent idea, and I'd love to get into that a little bit more. I also love that the toolkit walks you pretty thoroughly through conceptual questions to help select the right tools. But I think there's a question that Connie brought up that I think is a good one, and that is, you know, would there be a benefit to staff and to the community by creating specific tool paths based on what kind of project you're doing too? So I think it might be worth considering, would there be a benefit to update kind of the flow of how you go through the checklist? And if a particular project goes down a path, because we know we want to get early engagement and early feedback from those people who are really engaged in public policy development and want to share their thoughts, as opposed to other projects. So anyways, those are the thoughts that I have now. Thanks.
Any additional comments? All right, I will say that well, first of all, I think that your department, or the communications department, does a great job of offering a whole range of ways for people to give input to us and to learn about us. And I just can't believe all the different ways and places where I see information about the city of Issaquah. So great job there. I would love to see us get into perhaps some software where people could dialogue with each other. And I would like all those people to come to a public meeting and give us input, but we know that some people will not come to a public meeting, or that they can't come to a public meeting. And they still need to have that experience of being able to see what other people have said and comment on that. And so the software that you were proposing, that where that is possible, I think is something we should pursue. I know the Issaquah School District has had something like that for quite some time. And so maybe that is also a program or a platform that we could at least review and see if that would suit our needs as well. And yes, the idea of interactive maps and all kinds of tools, I think, is exciting and engages people, and makes engagement fun and interesting, and people learn something. So I'm all in favor of it. And then, like I said, I'm a hands-on person. I'd love to have a chance just to demo some of these different platforms and experience them myself. So whatever we can do to arrange that for council members, I think would be great. I see that Councilmember Hunt has a comment.
Thank you. First I had a question, which is, and it's on the topic of closing the loop. So we have the ability to sign up, notify me, and follow specific topics. Do we include in those notifications sort of like an update about how, you know, a poll, if there was a poll on a topic, that do you include an update about, like, the poll 84% of the people wanted this color sign, and so the council went with it, and now the signs are going to be that color? Or do you use it more just to notify about project milestones?
So on our major project pages, we'll often include a link to the survey results. And not often have we pushed out and said, here's the results of the survey. I think we can do a better job on closing the loop with folks once action's been taken by council, of here's what was decided, and here's all the information that was presented to them if you want to go watch the discussion. So I think that's one area we can. What's key to that is having really good contact lists by the projects, right? So that we can close the loop with those that have provided us that feedback.
Yeah. Okay. So my comment then is that I think I've seen an evolution on my time on council, where we have gotten a lot more specific information about, this was community input, or this was commission input. This was a meeting, main info from a meeting, or main info from a survey, and this is what was changed in the materials that went to council to accommodate that majority sentiment. And so we've seen that more and more, and like very clearly laid out in a matrix more and more, which I've definitely appreciated. So I think it might be worth shifting and providing that also to the people who do sign up for Notify Me, or that have done a poll. And if you have the button like, do you want us to follow up on this topic with you, then you have their poll information. So I think that might be a great way, and you have that, they already said you're not spamming them. They said they wanted to be following this topic. So I think that might be a good way to just, once council has taken action, say, the survey you participated in, 84% of the people said this, and council has decided to take this action. Look forward to seeing the signs in this color. So I think that might be an easy, relatively within the process already way of closing the loop, because I do think that's an important, it's an important engagement step that shows people that their comments are being used, which then gives you a reason to continue to engage. If you think your comment isn't used, then I think that's one of the reasons why people don't continue to engage with us. So I would like to explore that option more.
Can I add, because I was on the other side of taking comments from the general public for a long time, and it really depends on the size of the project. If you're working, for example, on a road project, it may be 6 months before you can provide a response and say, this is how your comments were used. There are some projects where you really can't provide an accurate answer for quite some time. So one of my thoughts would be that automatic response that goes out, thank you for your comments, could also say the timeline for this project is such and such, and we will be back to you in June, or give them some kind of information about how long the process might typically take under ordinary circumstances. It is frustrating. It's one of the things I hear most from people is, I commented and I never heard anything back. It's very frustrating, but I also understand that there are some projects where there is no, you don't want to give people inaccurate information. You want it to be accurate and in context. And sometimes the context is not there for quite some time. So, but bringing them along with information about how long the process may take, and it may be a long time before you get a response, at least they've got that piece of information. And then I do like the idea of coming back to them at some appropriate time in the future if we've got their email address, and giving them an update whenever it really is time that we've got an answer to how their input was used. So, and I have to compliment too, tonight I was really pleased, and also with the sustainability department, that we get these, this is what we heard from the public and this is what we did with that information. I think that's just really, really helpful for us. And I would imagine that that would be really, really good information for the community to know as well. All right, so I'm looking to see if there are any additional comments for Autumn on this topic. It's close to 10 p.m. Are we fading? All right. I think this is the end of the meeting, unless there is, because this is a special meeting, we can't do good of the order except for quick announcements. So I'm not going to call for good of the order unless somebody has an announcement that you'd like to provide real quickly. And I'm not seeing any. So this meeting is adjourned at 9:50 p.m. Thank you to everybody for a lot of really good input, and we'll see you next week. Bye.